Hello, everyone. It's me again. Just want to say thanks for tuning in as always. Hit that like button if you enjoy these stories, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new here. And as always, please enjoy these first date horror stories.
I almost didn't go that night, which is the part that keeps replaying in my head like I somehow missed a warning sign. It was one of those last-minute plans where you think, whatever, it's just dinner. Maybe it'll be a good story. I had been talking to her for like a week. Nothing intense, just normal stuff, memes, complaining about work, random late-night thoughts. She seemed funny, kind of sharp in a way that made me feel like I had to keep up. Would she suggest a meeting? I said yes without thinking too hard about it. The place she picked wasn't what I expected. It was his old restaurant tucked between a closed pharmacy and a place that sold used furniture. From the outside, it looked half shut down, like it had already given up but forgot to lock the door. The sign buzzed faintly, missing a couple letters, so it just read something like RIVRSD and an R. I stood outside for a minute, checking my phone, thinking maybe I got the address wrong. But she texted me saying she was already inside. The moment I walked in, it felt off. Not in a dramatic way, just small things. The lighting was dim, but not in a cozy way, more like they didn't bother fixing the bulbs. There were only a few tables, all spaced out weirdly far from each other. No music, just the faint hum of something in the back. I spotted her right away, though. She looked exactly like her pictures, which was already kind of rare. Dark hair, simple jacket, sitting straight like she had been waiting a while. She smiled when she saw me, and for a second everything felt normal again. I sat down, and we got into it right away, talking about random stuff like we had already known each other longer than we did. It was easy. Too easy, maybe. A waiter came over, older guy, kind of stiff, like he had been working there forever and stopped caring. He took our order without much reaction, just writing things down slowly. I remember thinking he barely even looked at her, like his eyes just skipped over her and landed on me instead. We started eating, and everything was fine for a while. The food wasn't great, but it wasn't bad enough to complain about. She laughed at things I said, leaned in a little when she talked, all the usual first date stuff. I started relaxing. I even thought about how I'd tell my friends it actually went well. Then she excused herself to go to the bathroom. Nothing weird about that. She stood up, grabbed her phone, and walked toward the back where a narrow hallway led out of sight. I watched her go just casually, then went back to picking up my food. A minute later, the waiter came by and asked if everything was all right. I said yeah, and mentioned she'd be back in a second. He paused in a strange way, like I had said something confusing. Then he looked at her seat, then back at me, and kind of frowned. He told me she hadn't left. I thought he was joking. I even glanced behind me, expecting to see her sitting there, and I somehow missed it. But the chair was empty. I told him she literally just walked to the bathroom. He didn't argue exactly, but he repeated it in a flat way, like he was correcting a mistake. He said she hadn't left her seat since I arrived. I laughed it off, said maybe he just didn't see her. He nodded slowly, but it didn't feel like he agreed. It felt like he was humoring me. When she came back, everything went back to normal again. She sat down, picked up her fork, and started talking like nothing happened. I didn't mention what the waiter said. It felt too weird, and I didn't want to make things awkward. A few minutes later, she excused herself again. This time I watched more carefully. I followed her with my eyes the whole way as she walked down the same hallway and disappeared. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds before the waiter showed up again. Same timing, same expression. He asked if I needed anything. I told him she just went to the bathroom again. He shook his head slightly, almost disappointed, and said she hadn't moved. I felt this weird drop in my stomach. I turned to the hallway, half expecting to see her standing there, but it was empty. I looked back at the chair, still empty. I told him I watched her leave. I was sure of it. He didn't raise his voice or anything, just calmly repeated that she had been sitting there the entire time. Then he walked away before I could push it further. I sat there staring at the chair, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't like I blinked and missed it. I saw her stand up. I saw her walk away. There was no way I imagined that. Then she came back again. Same as before. Same calm face, same smooth movement, sitting down like she had just been gone for a second. She picked up right where she left off in conversation, like no time had passed. I started paying attention to smaller details. Her plate didn't move when she got up. The chair didn't make any sound. Even her jacket stayed draped the exact same way over the back of it. It was like the version of her that left wasn't affecting anything around it. She excused herself a third time. At that point, I didn't even pretend it was normal. I watched her go, stood up immediately, and followed toward the hallway. The hallway was short. It led to two doors, well, slightly open. One was clearly a storage room, just shelves and boxes. The other was the bathroom. I checked both. Empty. There was nowhere else to go. No back exit, no side door. Just those two rooms. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. Maybe another hallway I missed, maybe a mirror or something weird with the layout. Then I heard the chair scrape behind me. I turned around and walked back to the table. She was sitting there again. Same position, same expression, like she never moved. The waiter was standing nearby, already looking at me like he expected this. He didn't say anything this time. He just gave me this look that felt like he had seen this before. I sat down slowly, trying to keep my face normal. My head was spinning, but I didn't want to react too strongly. I kept thinking there had to be a simple explanation, something I was missing. She kept talking. I noticed she never mentioned going to the bathroom. Not once. It was like those moments didn't exist for her. I started watching her hands, her posture, anything that might give it away. Everything looked real. Too real. But every time she excused herself after that, the same thing happened. She'd stand up, walk away, vanish, and then reappear without any sign she had ever left. And every time, the waiter would insist she had been sitting there the whole time. By the end of it, I couldn't eat anymore. I felt like I was sitting with two different versions of the same person, and only I could see one of them move. When the bill came, I didn't even question it. I just paid and stood up. She stood with me, smiling like it was a completely normal date. We walked out together. I glanced back through the window before we left the street. The table was still there, and she was still sitting in the chair, but I was standing outside next to her. I knew something was off before I even sat down, but not in a clear way. It was more like that quiet feeling you get when you walk into a room and then forget why you went there, like something is slightly wrong but you can't point at it. I almost turned around and left when I saw him already sitting there, but I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking it and kept walking. We matched a few days before, nothing serious. He seemed normal, maybe even better than most. He wasn't trying too hard, didn't send weird messages, didn't rush anything. His profile was simple, just a few pictures and a short bio. I remember thinking he looked calm, like the kind of person who doesn't stress over stuff. That was kind of the reason I agreed to meet him. The place was this quiet cafe near the edge of town, not one of those busy ones with loud music and groups of people. It was almost empty when I walked in, just one person at the counter and him sitting near the window. It made everything feel more focused, like there was nowhere to hide if things got awkward. He smiled when I walked up, and at first everything felt fine. He stood up, pulled the chair out slightly, just normal polite stuff. I sat down, put my bag under the table, and tried to relax. The first 10 minutes were completely normal. We talked about basic things, where we went to school, what we did during the week, stupid things like favorite food and movies. He was easy to talk to, which made it worse later. If he had been weird from the start, I would have left earlier. I remember the exact moment it shifted, and it wasn't dramatic. It was small. He mentioned something about moving houses a lot as a kid, and I said I didn't. I said I grew up in the same place my whole life. That was it. Then he casually brought up the street I grew up on. At first, I thought I must have told him before. Maybe in a message and forgot. I didn't think too much of it. I just nodded and asked how he knew. He didn't really answer directly. He just kept talking like it wasn't a big deal. Then he mentioned the color of the front door. That's when I felt it properly. That drop in my stomach, like something just slipped out of place. I had never posted my childhood house anywhere. I barely even talked about it. It wasn't something you could just guess. I tried to play it off, like maybe he found it online somehow. People can find anything if they try hard enough. I told myself that was probably it, but then he kept going. He mentioned the tree in the front yard. Not just that there was one, but that it leaned slightly to the left and had a low branch I used to sit on. I stopped reacting after that. I just listened. He didn't say it in a creepy way. That's what made it worse. He said it like he was remembering something normal, like he had been there. His tone didn't change. His face didn't change. Nothing about him seemed off. I started trying to think of explanations that made sense. Maybe we had mutual friends. Maybe he visited once and I forgot. Maybe there was some weird overlap I wasn't remembering. I kept searching for something that made it less strange. Then he mentioned my old bedroom. He described where the bed used to be, the side of the room I used to keep my desk, even the small crack in the wall near the window that I used to stare at when I couldn't sleep. I never told anyone about that crack, not even my friends. It was one of those small, meaningless details that only existed in my own memory. I felt cold, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want him to notice that something was wrong. I kept nodding, pretending it was normal, even though my head was racing. I started thinking maybe he was guessing and just getting lucky somehow, but that didn't make sense. These weren't general things. They were specific in a way that didn't leave room for guessing. Then he brought up something I hadn't thought about in years. He mentioned the time I got locked out of the house when I was around 8. He described how I sat on the back steps for hours because I was too scared to knock on the neighbor's door. He even mentioned the hoodie I was wearing, the one that was too big for me. That wasn't online. That wasn't something anyone else saw. My parents didn't even know about that. I never told them. I just went back inside later and acted like nothing happened. At that point, I stopped trying to understand it. I just felt stuck. Like if I moved too fast or said the wrong thing, something worse would happen. He kept going slowly, casually, like he was flipping through my memories. He talked about the inside of the house, the hallway, the sound the stairs made when you stepped on the third one from the bottom. He mentioned the way the bathroom light flickered sometimes and how I used to leave the door open because I didn't like how dark it got. I hadn't even thought about that in years. I finally asked him how he knew all of this. I tried to keep my voice steady, like I wasn't panicking. He didn't give a clear answer. He just looked at me for a second, like he was deciding something, then said it in the most normal way possible. He said he remembered it. That didn't make sense. I had never seen him before in my life. I was sure of that. He wasn't someone I forgot. I would have remembered him if he had been around back then. I started paying attention to his face more closely, trying to find something familiar. There was nothing. No recognition, no connection to anything in my past. But he kept talking like he belonged there. He mentioned my school, the route I used to take walking home, the shortcut through the small path behind the houses. He described things that weren't visible from the street, things you would only know if you had been right there. I felt like I was sitting across from someone who had been watching my life without me knowing. I started looking around the cafe, hoping someone else would notice how strange it was. But there was no one paying attention. The person at the counter had left, and it was just us and the quiet hum of the machines behind the bar. It felt like the whole place was sealed off. He paused at one point and really looked at me like he was checking if I understood yet. Then he mentioned the one thing that made everything stop. He brought up something that happened in my room late at night, something I had never told anyone, not even written down. It wasn't even something I fully understood myself. Just a moment I kept to myself because it felt too strange to explain. He described it exactly. Not close. Exactly. There was no way to explain that. No way to make it logical. I stood up after that. I didn't say anything. I didn't grab my drink or my bag right away. I just stood there, trying to get my body to move. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched me, calm as ever, like this was all expected. I grabbed my bag and walked out without looking back. I didn't run until I got to the end of the street. I turned once, just to see if he followed me. He wasn't there. But when I checked my phone later that night, there was a message from him. It wasn't long, just one line. He mentioned something I had done earlier that day, something that happened before I even met him. Something no one else could have known. I didn't notice it all at once. That's probably the worst part. If I had walked in and everyone was already staring, I would have just left and laughed it off later. But it crept up slowly, like something adjusting itself behind my back while I wasn't paying attention. The night started normal enough. I met her outside this restaurant that looked way nicer than anywhere I usually go. It had those big glass windows and warm lighting that makes everything look more expensive than it is. She picked it, said she'd been wanting to try it for a while. I didn't argue. She looked exactly like her pictures, maybe even better in person. She had this calm vibe, like nothing really bothered her. Not in a fake way, just steady. It made it easy to relax around her. We went inside together, got seated near the middle of the room, not too close to the windows, not too far from the kitchen. At first, everything felt completely fine. There were other people around, couples mostly, a few groups, nothing unusual. The kind of place where everyone keeps to themselves. We started talking, basic first date stuff. It wasn't awkward, which already felt like a win. I remember noticing one guy looking in our direction at some point, but I didn't think anything of it. People look around, it happens. I just went back to the conversation. Then a few minutes later, I caught someone else staring. This time it stuck out a bit more. It was a woman sitting across the room. She wasn't just glancing over. She was fully looking at me, not even trying to hide it. I looked away, thinking maybe I had something on my face or my shirt. I checked quickly, nothing. I told myself I was overthinking it and tried to ignore it. But then I noticed a third person. And a fourth. It wasn't sudden. It was like every time I looked up, there was one more person already looking at me. Not my date. Me. I tried to focus on her, keep the conversation going, but it started getting harder. I kept getting distracted by it. Every time I glanced around, more eyes were on me. What made it worse was how still they were. They weren't talking, not really eating, not checking their phones, just sitting there, facing in my direction. Some had their heads slightly turned. Others were directly looking at me. None of them looked away when I caught them. I finally mentioned it to her. I tried to keep it casual like I was joking about it. I said something about people staring. She looked confused. She glanced around quickly, then back at me, and said she didn't see anything unusual. That didn't help. It made it worse. I looked again, slower this time, really taking it in. Every table. Every single person. All looking at me. Not at her. Not anything else. Just me. I felt this pressure building, like the whole room was closing in without actually moving. I tried to laugh it off again, but it didn't come out right. My voice sounded off even to me. She kept acting normal. Completely normal. Talking, smiling, asking questions, like nothing had changed. I started testing it. I leaned slightly to the side, trying to see if their eyes would follow. They did. Every single one of them adjusted just enough to keep looking directly at me. I sat back straight again, trying not to react too much. My heart was beating faster, but I didn't want to make a scene. I told her again, more seriously this time. She shook her head and said she couldn't see anyone doing that. I asked her to point out what she was seeing. She started casually describing the room, the people, what they were doing. None of it matched. She mentioned a couple talking and laughing near the window. I looked over and they were completely silent, both staring at me without blinking. She mentioned someone checking their phone at another table. That person was holding their phone, but not looking at it, just staring straight at me. It was like we were in the same place, but seeing two different versions of it. I stopped talking after that. I couldn't focus on anything she was saying anymore. My attention kept snapping back to the people around us. The longer it went on, the more wrong it felt. Their expressions weren't normal. Not angry, not curious, just blank, like they were waiting for something. None of them blinked. I started noticing smaller details. Their posture didn't change. Their hands stayed in the same positions. Plates in front of them didn't move. It was like everything except me and my date had been paused, but their eyes were still active. I tried to look away completely, just focus on the table, but I could still feel it. That constant attention from every direction. At some point, I realized something else. The staff. I looked toward the counter, expecting to see movement, someone working, anything normal. They were all still too. The waiter near the kitchen door was standing in place, tray in hand, staring at me. No one was moving unless I moved first. I tested it again. I shifted in my seat, adjusted my arm. A few of them made small movements right after, like delayed reactions, not natural, more like copying. I felt like I was being watched and studied at the same time. I told her I wanted to leave. She looked confused again, but the night was going perfectly fine. She didn't seem scared, didn't seem to notice anything wrong. That made it worse than if she had been panicking too. I stood up. The moment I did, every single person in the room stood up at the exact same time. Chairs scraped the floor all at once. It wasn't loud, but it was too perfectly in sync. My date stayed seated. She looked up at me, confused, asking why I stood up so suddenly. I looked around. Everyone else was standing, facing me, still staring. No one moved closer. No one spoke. just standing there like they were waiting for the next step. I sat back down slowly. The second I did, they all sat down too, at the same time. That was the moment I knew it wasn't something I could explain. I grabbed my bag and told her I was leaving, even though she still didn't understand why. She stayed calm, said I was overreacting, said there was nothing going on. I didn't argue anymore. I just walked toward the exit. As I moved, every person in the restaurant turned their heads to follow me. Not their bodies, just their heads, all rotating at the same pace. I didn't look back after that. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The street was normal. Cars passing, people walking, everything felt real again. I stood there for a second, trying to calm down, telling myself it was over. Then I glanced at the window. Inside, every single person was still standing. All of them facing the glass. All of them staring directly at me. Except her. She was still sitting at the table, looking around like she was completely alone. I knew my phone was dead because I watched it die in my hand about 10 minutes before I met her. Not low battery, not glitching, actually dead. The screen went black, didn't turn back on, nothing. I even tried holding the power button while I was walking, hoping it would come back just long enough to check something, but it didn't. I remember thinking it was annoying, but not a big deal. It was just a first date. I didn't need my phone that badly. I ended up putting it face down on the table as soon as I sat down, mostly out of habit. It felt weird not checking it, like I kept reaching for something that wasn't there. I even joked about it in my head, like maybe it was a good thing, less distraction. She got there a couple minutes after me. She looked a bit nervous at first, but in a normal way. Not awkward, just quiet. We started talking and it got easier pretty quickly. She laughed at small things, asked questions back, didn't seem bored or distant. It felt normal. The place was this small late-night diner, the kind that's always open but never really busy. Bright lights, clean tables, a couple of people scattered around. Nothing strange about it. It actually felt kind of safe, like the kind of place where nothing weird would happen. We had been talking for maybe 15 minutes when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled slightly, then looked back up at me. I didn't think anything of it. People get messages all the time. A minute later, it buzzed again. This time she checked it longer. Her expression changed just a little. Not scared, just confused, like she was trying to figure something out. I asked if everything was all right. She hesitated for a second, then turned her phone slightly toward me. There was a message for me. Not from someone with my name saved differently. It was my number. My contact. A message sent just seconds ago. I remember feeling this quick flash of confusion before I even thought about the obvious problem. I looked down at my phone, still face down on the table, completely dead. I told her that didn't make sense. I showed her my phone, tapped the screen a few times to prove it wasn't turning on. She looked between the phone and me, clearly unsure what to think. I told her maybe it was some kind of glitch. Maybe someone spoofed the number. I didn't even fully believe what I was saying, but it sounded better than nothing. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. We tried to move past it, started talking again, pretending it wasn't weird. Then her phone buzzed again. She didn't pick it up right away this time. She just stared at it for a second, like she already knew what it would be. When she finally checked, her face went more serious. Another message from me. I asked what it said. She hesitated again, then showed me. It wasn't anything normal. It wasn't random or spam. It was specific. It mentioned something I had just said out loud a minute earlier. Word for word. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't texted her that. I couldn't have. My phone was still sitting there, dead, untouched. I picked it up again, pressed the button harder this time like that would make a difference. Nothing. She started looking around the diner like maybe someone was watching us. I did the same, but nothing stood out. Just a couple people eating, a guy near the counter, a waitress waving down a table. No one paying attention to us. Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't even wait, she showed me immediately. Another message from me. It responded to something she had just said, something quiet, something no one else should have heard. I felt this pressure building in my chest. I kept trying to think of a logical explanation. Maybe my phone wasn't actually dead. Maybe it turned on somehow without me noticing. Maybe someone had access to my account. But none of it lined up. The timing was too exact. The messages were too accurate. I asked her to call my phone. She did. It rang, but not from the phone on the table. The sound came from somewhere else. Faint, distant, like it was coming from behind the diner or maybe from another room. We both heard it. We both turned toward the same direction. There was nothing there but a closed door with a sign that said staff only. The ringing stopped after a few seconds. We looked back at each other, both of us not saying anything for a moment. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at it slowly like she didn't want to. Another message. This one was different. It wasn't repeating anything from our conversation. It was describing what I was doing. It mentioned how I was holding my phone, how I kept pressing the button even though it wasn't working. It mentioned the way I was looking around the room. I put my phone down immediately. I felt like if I moved, it would just keep tracking everything. She kept getting messages, each one more detailed than the last. They described things before they happened. Like when I was about to stand up, the message came in a second before I actually moved, describing it exactly. I froze halfway through standing, then slowly sat back down. I started to feel like I wasn't the one in control of what I was doing anymore, like something else was just slightly ahead of me, writing it out before it happened. She asked me if I was messing with her, but I could tell she already knew I wasn't. I didn't even try to explain anymore. There was nothing to say. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at it, then her face changed completely. Not confused this time. Not unsure. Just scared. I asked what it said. She didn't show me right away. She just stared at me like she was trying to decide something. Then she turned the phone toward me. The message said I was going to reach across the table in 10 seconds. I didn't move. I sat there, counting in my head, making sure I didn't move. 5 seconds passed. 7. 9. My arm twitched. I tried to stop it, but it kept going. Slow at first, then more deliberate. I grabbed the edge of the table to hold myself in place, but it didn't help. My hand kept sliding forward. She pulled her hands back, eyes locked on mine. I was still trying to fight it, but it felt like my body was ignoring me. My fingers reached the middle of the table and stopped. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't even need to show me. I already knew it would match exactly what just happened. I pulled my hand back as fast as I could, breathing harder now. I looked down at my phone again. Still dead. Still cold. But then it vibrated. Just once. I froze. The screen lit up slowly. Battery icon still empty, but the phone was on. There was one notification. A message. From me. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, feeling like if I read it, something worse would happen. She was watching me, waiting. I finally tapped it. It was a single line. It described what I was about to do next. I looked up at her, and I already knew it was right. I should have left the second I saw the house, but I didn't, and that's the part that bothers me the most. It wasn't even that scary at first, just wrong in a quiet way. Like when something looks normal but feels like it hasn't been touched in years. I remember sitting in my car outside, engine still running, staring at the place, and thinking maybe I had the wrong address. But my phone said it was right, and she was texting me to hurry up. We had been talking for about 2 weeks. Nothing weird, nothing intense, just steady. She was funny without trying too hard, and she actually replied properly instead of sending one-word answers. She was the one who suggested I pick her up, which I didn't mind. It felt more real than just meeting somewhere. The street itself was quiet, like too quiet for that time of night. No people outside, no lights in most of the houses, just a few cars parked along the curb. Her house stood out a bit, not because it was nicer, but because it looked older than everything around it. The paint was faded, the front garden overgrown, like no one had bothered with it in a while. Right as I was about to get out of the car, my phone buzzed. She told me she was ready and asked what was taking so long. I looked at the house again, then back at my phone. I told her I was outside. She replied almost instantly, saying she didn't see me. That made me pause. I checked the number on the house again. It matched what she sent earlier. I told her I was definitely there. She said to knock on the door. So I did. The walk up to the door felt longer than it should have. The path was cracked, weeds growing through it. I noticed the windows up close looked dusty, like they hadn't been cleaned in a long time. I remember thinking it didn't match how she talked about her place. She made it sound normal, lived in. I knocked. There was a delay before anything happened, long enough that I thought no one was home. Then I heard movement inside. Slow, dragging steps. The door opened just enough for someone to look out. It was an older man. He looked confused, like I had just woken him up or something. He didn't look angry, just tired. I asked for her, said I was there to pick her up. The moment I said her name, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice, like something heavy dropped behind his eyes. He opened the door a bit more and looked at me properly. Then he told me she didn't live there anymore. I thought maybe I got the wrong house after all. I showed him my phone, the messages, the address. He looked at the screen for a second, then back at me. He said she moved away years ago. That didn't make any sense. I had been talking to her that same day. She told me what she was wearing, what time she'd be ready. It was all recent. I told him that. He just shook his head slowly, like he had heard something like this before. Then my phone buzzed again. I looked down. It was her. She asked why I was talking to her dad and not coming inside. I felt my stomach drop. I looked back at the man standing in front of me. He was still there, still watching me, but now there was something else in his expression. Not confusion anymore, something closer to concern. I showed him the message. He didn't react right away. He just stared at the screen for a few seconds, then stepped back slightly and opened the door wider. He let me in. The inside of the house didn't match the outside exactly, but it still felt off. It was clean, but not in a fresh way. More like nothing had been moved in a long time. The furniture looked old. The air felt still. There were pictures on the walls. I noticed them immediately. Photos of her. Different ages, different places, but it was definitely her. Same face, same smile. That should have made it feel normal. It didn't. It made it worse. My phone buzzed again. She asked why I wasn't coming upstairs. I froze. I hadn't told her I was inside yet. I hadn't said anything since I showed her dad the message. I asked him where her room was. He hesitated before answering, like he didn't want to say it out loud. Then he pointed toward the stairs. He told me no one had been up there in a long time. That didn't line up with what my phone was saying. Another message came through. She said she could hear me downstairs. I looked up at the ceiling without meaning to. There was no sound, no footsteps, no movement, nothing. Just silence. I asked him if anyone else was home. He shook his head. Said it was just him. I started to feel like I shouldn't be there anymore, like I had already crossed into something I didn't understand. But then my phone buzzed again. She told me to hurry. Said she was waiting. I don't know why, but I started walking toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than it should have. The house stayed quiet the whole time. No creaks, no sounds, nothing to suggest anyone was actually up there. At the top of the stairs, there was a hallway with a few closed doors. My phone buzzed again. She said second door on the left. I stood there for a second, just staring at the door. It looked normal, plain. Nothing about it stood out. But the handle looked slightly worn, like it had been used a lot at some point. I reached out and touched it. Cold. I turned it slowly. The room inside was empty. Not just empty like no one was there, but empty like it had been cleared out. No bed, no furniture, nothing on the walls. Just bare space. I stepped inside anyway, just a little. My phone buzzed again. She asked why I was just standing there. I turned in a slow circle, looking at the empty room. There was nowhere for her to be. I typed back, asking where she was. The reply came almost instantly. She said she was right in front of me. I froze. I looked around again, slower this time. Nothing. Just empty space. Then my phone buzzed again. She said I was blocking the doorway. I turned toward the door. It was still open. But for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something shift in the space between me and the hallway. Not a full shape, not clear, just enough to make my eyes try to focus. Then it was gone. I backed out of the room immediately. My phone buzzed again, faster this time. Multiple messages in a row. She asked why I was leaving. Asked if I couldn't see her. Asked why I came if I was just going to walk away. I didn't answer. I went straight down the stairs, not stopping, not looking back. Her dad was still standing near the bottom watching me. I didn't explain anything. I just walked past him and out the door. My phone kept buzzing the whole time. Even when I got back to my car. Even when I started driving away. The messages didn't stop. They kept coming in one after another. All saying the same thing. That I left her waiting in the room. I didn't notice it the first time, which is what keeps bothering me. If it had been obvious right away, I would have left, and that would have been it. But it wasn't. It started so small that I convinced myself I imagined it, and by the time I stopped doing that, I had already stayed way too long. I remember being early, sitting alone at this place near the river. It wasn't fancy, just one of those restaurants with big windows and soft lights reflecting off the water outside. People walked past every few minutes, and there was this constant low noise of conversation and cutlery that made everything feel normal. I kept checking my phone, not because she was late, but just to avoid sitting there doing nothing. Then I looked up, and she was already walking toward me. She smiled, and I stood up, and everything felt exactly like it should. She looked like her pictures. Dark hair, light eyes, nothing unusual. If anything, I remember thinking she looked better in person. We sat down, started talking, and it was easy right away. No awkward pauses, no weird moments. She had this calm way of talking, like she didn't rush anything. It made it easier for me to relax. For the first part of the date, nothing stood out. Then I looked away. It was something small. I glanced toward the window when a car passed by, just for a second. When I looked back at her, something felt off. I couldn't explain it right away. She still looked like herself, but there was a tiny difference. Her nose looked slightly sharper, like the angle had changed. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make me pause for a second. I told myself it was the lighting. That made sense at the time. The lights were soft, shadows moving slightly as people walked by. It was easy to believe that's all it was. I kept talking like nothing happened. A few minutes later, I looked down at the menu. When I looked back up, her eyes looked different. Same color, but the shape wasn't quite right. A little wider maybe, or set slightly differently. It was hard to pin down, which made it worse. I stared for a second too long that time. She noticed and asked if something was wrong. I just shook my head and said I was thinking. I tried to focus on something else, anything else. The conversation, the food, the people around us. But now I couldn't stop noticing. Every time I looked away and then back at her, something was slightly different. Her jawline looked softer, then sharper again. Her eyebrows shifted just enough to change her whole expression. Even her smile felt off sometimes, like it didn't quite match the rest of her face. But it was never all at once. Never enough to say for sure something had changed. It felt like trying to remember someone's face after not seeing them for years. Close, but not exact. I started testing it. I looked away on purpose, counted to 3 in my head, then looked back. Different. This time her nose looked slightly wider, like it had been adjusted, but not perfectly. I looked down again longer this time. When I looked back up, her eyes were slightly uneven. One looked just a bit higher than the other. I felt this tight feeling in my chest, but I tried to keep my face normal. I didn't want her to notice that I was noticing. She kept talking like nothing was wrong. Her voice didn't change. Her tone stayed steady. It was just her face. I started focusing on details, trying to catch it happening, but it only changed when I wasn't looking directly at her. If I kept eye contact, nothing moved. The moment I broke it, even for a second, something shifted. It didn't look like a smooth change. It looked like something trying to correct itself. Like someone copying a face from memory and getting small parts wrong. I tried to tell myself it was just my head messing with me. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the lighting really was playing tricks on me. But then it got harder to ignore. At one point, I looked down to take a sip of my drink. When I looked back up, her face looked like a different version of her entirely. Same general features, but arranged slightly wrong. Her eyes were too far apart. Her mouth looked slightly lower than it should be. Her nose didn't match the rest of her face at all. I felt my stomach drop. I blinked a few times, hoping it would reset, but it didn't. Then she blinked, and everything snapped back to normal. Perfect again, like nothing had happened. I almost convinced myself right there that I imagined all of it, but I couldn't ignore what I had just seen. I started avoiding looking away completely. I kept my eyes on her as much as I could, even when it felt unnatural. She didn't seem to notice anything strange about that. She just kept talking, smiling, acting like everything was fine. But it was exhausting. My eyes started to burn from not blinking enough. I could feel myself slipping, like I couldn't keep it up forever. Eventually, I had to look away. Just for a second. When I looked back, her face was wrong again. This time worse than before. It wasn't just one feature. Everything was slightly off. Her eyes were uneven. Her nose was too small. Her mouth was stretched too wide when she smiled. It looked like someone had tried to rebuild her face quickly and didn't have enough time to get it right. I felt this sudden rush of panic, but I forced myself to stay still. I didn't react. I just kept looking at her. She kept talking, completely normal. Then she blinked again, and her face snapped back. Perfect. Like it had been before. I started to realize something. The changes weren't random. They were corrections. Each time I looked away, it was like something was trying to recreate her, getting parts wrong, and fixing them when I looked directly. Like it needed my attention to stay accurate. I tested it one more time. I looked down at my phone, counted to 5. When I looked back up, her face was the worst it had been. Everything was off. Not in a dramatic way, but enough that it didn't look fully human anymore. Still close. Still trying. But wrong. I felt this instant need to leave. I didn't care about being polite anymore. I grabbed my jacket and stood up. She looked at me, confused. Her face was still wrong. I didn't wait for it to fix itself. I just walked away. As I moved toward the exit, I glanced back once. Just once. She was still sitting there. But her face hadn't corrected. It was still wrong. And she was watching me with it. Not blinking. Not fixing it. Like she didn't need to anymore. I didn't think anything of the empty chair at first, which is probably the worst part of the whole thing. If I had questioned it right away, maybe I would have left before it got weird. But it just felt normal, like every table has extra chairs. You don't count them, you just sit down and forget about it. The restaurant was one of those places that tries too hard to look casual, but ends up feeling kind of staged. Dim lights, wooden tables, candles that don't really light anything. It wasn't busy, but it wasn't empty either. Just enough people to make it feel like a normal night. I got there a bit early and they sat me at a table for 4, even though I told them it would just be 2 of us. I remember thinking it was a bit much, but I didn't say anything. I just sat down and waited. The chair across from me was for her. The one next to it was empty, and the one beside me stayed empty too. She showed up a few minutes later, smiling, a little out of breath like she hurried. Everything felt fine right away. She was easy to talk to, not awkward, not distant. We got into normal conversation almost instantly, like we'd already met before. I didn't notice anything strange about her. No weird behavior, no odd comments. Just a regular person on a regular date. The only thing that stood out, if I think about it now, was how she kept her bag on the chair next to her, instead of the empty one between us. It wasn't a big deal, just one of those small choices people make without thinking. But it meant the chair between us stayed completely clear the whole time. We ordered food, started eating, and everything went the way you'd expect. Talking, laughing, those small pauses where you both looked down at your plate, and then back up again. Nothing felt off. At some point, I remember adjusting my seat slightly, like shifting closer to the table. When I did, my knee brushed against something under it. I thought it was the table leg at first, but the angle was wrong. It felt softer, like fabric. I pulled my leg back and checked under the table quickly. There was nothing there. I told myself I must have hit the edge of the table or something and just didn't feel it right. I didn't think about it again for a while. Later, when the food was halfway done, I noticed something else. The candle on the table flickered suddenly, even though there was no breeze. It leaned slightly toward the empty chair between us, like something had just moved there. I glanced at the chair without really meaning to. Still empty. I went back to eating. Then I noticed my glass had shifted slightly. Not in a big way, just a small movement, like it had been nudged. I hadn't touched it. She hadn't touched it either. I looked at her expecting some kind of reaction, but she didn't seem to notice anything. She kept talking like everything was normal. I started to feel a bit off, but I didn't want to ruin the date over something small. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Then it happened again. This time it was more obvious. My fork moved. Not fell, not slipped. It slid slightly across the table, just enough to be noticeable. I froze for a second, staring at it. She noticed me staring and asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and said it was nothing. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. The rest of the meal felt heavier after that. Not because anything big happened, but because I kept noticing small things. The empty chair between us felt less empty. Not visually. It still looked like nothing was there. But space-wise, it felt occupied. Like there was something taking up that space even if I couldn't see it. I found myself avoiding moving my arms too far toward that side of the table. I didn't want to accidentally touch whatever I thought might be there. She didn't react to any of it. She stayed completely normal the entire time. Eventually, we finished eating and asked for the bill. The waiter brought it over, placed it right in the middle of the table, directly in front of that empty chair. That stuck out to me immediately. Most of the time they place it closer to one person than the other. This time, it was exactly centered. I reached for it, hesitating slightly as my hand passed over that space. For a second, I felt resistance. Not solid, not strong, just enough to feel like my hand brushed against something that wasn't there. I pulled the bill back quickly and looked at it. At first, everything looked normal. 2 meals, 2 drinks, the total amount at the bottom. Then I noticed an extra line. It wasn't at the top with the other items. It was listed separately, just above the total. It said third guest. No food listed next to it. No drink. Just that. And a price. $12. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was a mistake, some kind of service charge or something labeled wrong. I showed it to her. She looked at it, frowned slightly, and said she didn't remember ordering anything extra. That didn't help. I called the waiter over and pointed it out. He looked at the receipt, then at the table, then back at me. He didn't look confused. He looked like I was the one missing something. He said it was correct. I asked what the third guest charge was for. He didn't answer directly. He just gestured slightly toward the table, toward the empty chair between us. I felt that same drop in my stomach again. I told him there were only 2 of us. He nodded slowly like he understood what I was saying, but didn't agree. He repeated that the charge was correct. Then he walked away. I looked back at the receipt. The line was still there. Third guest. $12. I looked at the chair again. Still empty. But now it felt worse. Heavier. Like something was definitely there, just out of reach of being seen. I didn't argue about the bill after that. I just paid it. I didn't want to stay there any longer. We both stood up at the same time. And that's when it happened. The third chair moved. Not a lot. Just a small shift backward, like someone had pushed it to stand up. I froze. She froze too. For the first time all night, she actually looked at that chair properly. Her expression changed slightly, like she noticed something she couldn't explain. But she didn't say anything. Neither did I. We walked out together, both quieter than before. I didn't look back until we reached the door. When I did, the table was still there. 3 chairs pushed in. 1 slightly angled away, like someone had just left. I knew something was off the moment I realized I couldn't remember ordering anything, but the food was already there in front of me. Not arriving, not being served, just already sitting there like it had always been there. I told myself I must have zoned out for a second, but that didn't sit right. You don't forget ordering a whole meal. The place she picked was weird from the start. Not in an obvious way, just small things that didn't line up. It was tucked down a side street that didn't have much else around it. No other restaurants, no shops still open, just this one place with dim lights inside and a sign that barely worked. Half the letters were out, so you couldn't even fully read the name. She was already there when I walked in, sitting at a table near the back. I remember thinking it was strange she didn't stand up or wave or anything. She just watched me walk over like she had been waiting a long time. But when I sat down, she smiled, and everything felt normal again. She looked exactly like her pictures. Nothing strange about her at all. That's probably why I stayed as long as I did. If she looked even slightly off, I would have left way earlier. We started talking, and it went fine. She was easy to talk to. asked normal questions, laughed at the right times. It didn't feel forced. If anything, it felt smoother than most first dates. At some point, I noticed there was already a plate in front of me. I don't remember the waiter coming over. I don't remember ordering. But there it was. Food, warm, freshly plated, like it had just been set down. I paused for a second, trying to think back, but nothing came up. It was just blank. She noticed me looking at it and told me I should try it. I laughed it off at first, said I didn't even remember what I'd ordered. She just smiled and said it didn't matter. So I tried it. It tasted normal. Good even. Nothing strange about it. That made it easier to ignore how it got there. I kept eating, and we kept talking. Then I noticed something else. She wasn't eating. At first, I thought maybe she was just waiting for her food. But there was no second plate coming. Nothing else was being brought out. I asked if she was going to order something. She shook her head and said she wasn't hungry. That didn't seem too weird. Some people don't eat on first dates. I didn't think too much about it. But she kept watching me eat. Not in a creepy way at first, just focused, like she was paying attention to what I thought of the food. Every time I paused, she told me to try something else on the plate, to take another bite, to finish it. It felt a bit pushy, but still within normal range, like she just wanted me to enjoy it. Then another plate showed up. Again, I didn't see it being brought over. It was just suddenly there. Different food this time, still warm. I looked around trying to catch a waiter nearby, but there was no one close enough. The place wasn't busy, so it should have been easy to notice. I asked her if she ordered something for me. She just told me to try it. I hesitated a bit longer this time. Something about it felt wrong. But I still took a bite. Same thing. It tasted completely normal. Nothing off about it. She seemed pleased when I did. That's when I started noticing how she reacted. Every time I ate, her expression changed slightly. Not in a big way, just small shifts, like she was watching for something specific. I tried to ignore it, but it kept happening. Another plate appeared. Then another. Each time, I couldn't remember ordering it. Couldn't remember a waiter coming over. It just kept appearing. And every time she told me to try it. She still didn't eat anything herself. At some point, I stopped talking as much. I was too focused on what was happening. My head felt slightly off, like I couldn't think clearly. I started to feel full, but she kept encouraging me to keep going. Not aggressively, just calmly, like it was expected. I slowed down, pushing the food around on the plate instead of actually eating it. That's when the waiter came over. He moved quietly, almost like he didn't want to be noticed. He stood close to me, not directly in my line of sight. Then he leaned in slightly. His voice was low when he spoke, barely above a whisper. He said no food was ordered. I felt my whole body go still. I looked at him, trying to process what he just said. He didn't repeat it. He just straightened up and walked away like nothing happened. I looked back at the table. The plates were still there, full of food. Real. I could smell it. I had already tasted it. I looked at her. She was watching me again, same calm expression. Like nothing had changed. I asked her if she heard what the waiter said. She tilted her head slightly, like she didn't understand the question. Then she told me to keep eating. That's when it hit me properly. I looked at the plates again, really looked at them. Something felt off. Not about the food itself, but about how it sat on the plate. The portions weren't quite right. The arrangement looked slightly wrong, like it had been put together by someone who didn't fully understand how meals are supposed to look. I pushed one of the plates slightly. For a second, it didn't move the way it should have. Like there was resistance, then it slid too easily. My stomach turned. I stood up. She didn't move. She just watched me, that same calm expression still there. I looked around the restaurant. There were other tables, but no one was eating. No plates. No drinks. Just people sitting there. I hadn't noticed that before. I looked back at our table. All the plates were still there. I blinked. They were gone. Completely gone. The table was empty. Like nothing had ever been there. My stomach dropped hard. I hadn't imagined eating. I could still taste it. I looked at her again. She was still sitting there. Still watching me. She told me I hadn't finished yet. I didn't respond. I just walked away. I didn't stop until I was outside. The air felt different immediately, like I could finally think properly again. I stood there for a minute, trying to process everything. Then I realized something. I still felt full, like I had eaten way too much. But when I looked down at my hands, there was no sign of food. No grease, no crumbs, nothing. Like I hadn't touched anything at all. I haven't gone back to any restaurant since without checking the table first. And sometimes when I'm sitting alone, I still get that feeling. Like there's a plate in front of me, waiting. I knew something was wrong before I even sat down, but not in a big obvious way. It was more like I felt behind, like I had already missed something that hadn't happened yet. I remember standing outside the place, checking my phone, and getting this weird thought that I was late even though I was early. That feeling didn't go away the whole night. She picked this place on the edge of town. Not really a restaurant, more like a bar that also served food. Low lighting, music playing just loud enough that you had to lean in a bit to talk. It wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. Just enough people to make everything feel normal. She was already inside when I got there, sitting at a table near the wall. When I walked up, she smiled right away like she recognized me instantly, even though we had never met in person before. Everything started off fine. We sat down, started talking the usual first date stuff. Where we're from, what we do, all that. She seemed easy to talk to, maybe a little too easy. Like she always knew what to say next without thinking. The first time it happened, I almost didn't notice. I was about to make a joke, something small about how bad I am at picking places to eat. I hadn't said it yet, it was just forming in my head. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, like she had just heard something funny. I stopped for a second, confused, then said the joke anyway. She laughed again, but softer this time, like the second reaction didn't hit as hard. I remember thinking maybe she just guessed what I was going to say. It wasn't a complicated joke. People make similar ones all the time. So I ignored it. We kept talking. A few minutes later, it happened again. I was about to say something about the music, how it was louder than I expected. I hadn't opened my mouth yet. She smiled and let out this small laugh. Then I said it. Same thing as before. She reacted less the second time. That's when I noticed it properly. The timing wasn't off by much, just a second or two, but it was enough to feel wrong. I started paying closer attention. I tested it without making it obvious. I thought of something random, something I wasn't even sure I'd say out loud. Before I could decide, she laughed. I didn't say it. I just sat there watching her. Her smile faded slightly, like she was waiting for me to finish something I hadn't started. Then she tilted her head a bit, like she was confused why I stopped. I felt this weird pressure in my chest, but I tried to keep it together. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe I was giving off signals without realizing. Maybe my face showed what I was about to say. Maybe she was just really good at reading people. But that didn't explain everything. I tried again. I thought of a completely different joke, something out of place, something that didn't match the conversation at all. She laughed. Before I said anything, I didn't say it again. I just watched her. This time she didn't wait long. She moved on like nothing happened, like the moment didn't matter. That's when it started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just that she was reacting early. It felt like she was hearing things before I said them. Like there was a version of me talking ahead of me. I started slowing down my thoughts, trying not to think of anything specific. Just focusing on what she was saying. That seemed to help for a bit. She stopped laughing randomly. Everything felt normal again. But the moment I started forming a thought, even slightly, she reacted. A smile. A small laugh. Sometimes just a change in expression, like she was responding to something I hadn't done yet. It got harder to ignore. At one point, I tried to completely blank my mind. Just listen, not think, not prepare anything to say. She stared at me for a second, her expression flat. Then she looked slightly confused. Like something was missing. That made it worse. It felt like she needed me to think ahead for her to react. Like she was following something that hadn't happened yet. I started to feel out of sync, like I was lagging behind myself. Every time I spoke, it felt delayed, like I was catching up with something she had already heard. I tried to speed up, say things faster, but it didn't change anything. She was always just ahead. Then it got more specific. I thought about asking her a question, something simple. Before I said it, she started answering. Not fully, just the beginning, like she was responding to something already asked. I stopped again, mid-thought. She stopped, too. Her expression froze for a second, then reset. She looked at me like she was waiting. I didn't say anything. She didn't react. The moment stretched out longer than it should have. Then I thought of something again. She smiled. I didn't say it. She kept smiling like she was waiting for the rest. It felt like I was controlling her reactions without meaning to. Or something else was. I tried one last thing. I thought of something I would never say out loud. Something completely out of place, something that didn't fit the situation at all. She laughed. Loud. Louder than before. It didn't match the setting, didn't match anything. People at nearby tables looked over for a second. I didn't say the thought. I just sat there staring at her. Her laugh faded slowly. Then she looked at me, still smiling, like she was waiting for me to finish. I felt this sudden need to leave. Not slowly, not politely. Just get out. I stood up without warning. She didn't react right away. Then she stood up too. At the exact same time, I thought about leaving. Not when I moved. When I thought it. That's when I realized it wasn't just my words. It was everything. She wasn't reacting to what I did. She was reacting to what I was about to do. I grabbed my jacket and walked away. She followed a step behind me. Not matching my pace exactly. Matching my intention. Every time I thought about turning, she adjusted before I did. Every time I thought about stopping, she slowed down first. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The cold air hit me, and for a second, everything felt normal again. I kept walking without looking back. Then I made a mistake. I thought about turning around, just for a second. Before I actually did it, I heard her laugh behind me, right where I was about to look. I didn't turn around after that. I just kept walking. Even now, sometimes I catch myself thinking something random. And for a split second, I feel like I already heard someone react to it. Like I'm still a step behind. I should have known something was off the moment he led me up the narrow stairs to his flat. Not in a classic horror way, like a creaking floorboard or a shadow in the corner, just little things that didn't fit. The hallway smelled faintly like old wood and something metallic, like a penny stuck in a drain, and the walls were lined with cheap framed prints that seemed fine at first. Nothing alarming, just fine. But I had a feeling in my gut, one of those you can't ignore. He had invited me up after dinner. The evening had gone okay. Nothing spectacular, but he seemed normal. Funny enough, nice enough. Not weird in the ways you notice immediately. We had walked back from the small diner near the station, talking about stupid stuff, movies, music I barely remembered. I remember thinking how comfortable it felt to be walking next to him, like I'd done this 100 times before. That thought should have set off alarms too. His flat door opened and I stepped in, glancing around. The living room was small but neat, not cluttered, not messy. Cozy in that way that's more suffocating than inviting. That's the word that hits me now when I think about it. Cozy. But wrong cozy. The first thing I noticed was the walls. They were plastered with photos. Lots of them. At first glance, it looked like the usual snapshots of friends, vacations, birthdays, nothing strange. Then I looked closer. Every photo had me in it. Every single one. Not just one or two that he could have photoshopped or hung as a joke. Every photo. Me in summer dresses from years ago, me at my high school graduation, me in a blurry group photo at a party I could barely remember. There were even photos of me as a kid on the playground on my first day of school, sitting in the back of the classroom. Some of them were so old I barely remembered the moments myself. I froze. He noticed my expression and laughed lightly, like he knew I would react this way. He didn't touch the photos, didn't move them, didn't explain them either. He just stood there smiling. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe they were lookalikes? Someone who knew me and had an uncanny resemblance. But the details didn't match. The hair, the freckles, The exact tilt of my chin in 100 different angles. It was me. No doubt about it. My heart started racing. I told myself to calm down, to think logically. Maybe he had been following me, taking photos when I didn't notice. But some of them were from years ago, some from places I hadn't been in years, some moments I hadn't even posted anywhere. Not online, not in public. I moved closer to the wall, trying to look at a few specific ones. One was me at a summer camp when I was 10, grinning at the camera, a giant ice cream cone melting in my hand. Another was me on a bench at the mall last year, the one I remembered distinctly because I had been wearing that green jacket that everyone hated. And there were more, hundreds of them, stacked almost floor to ceiling. I took a step back. My stomach twisted. I didn't know if I was angry, scared, or just plain stunned. He started talking casually, like the walls didn't exist. He told me to sit down on the couch, offered me a drink. I didn't sit. I couldn't. Every time I moved, my eyes went back to the wall. I tried to speak. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to ask him how he had all these photos, how he had gotten them, how he knew me so intimately from a time before we ever met. But I didn't. The words felt useless. I kept walking slowly around the room, staring at every frame. Some of the photos were candid, like snapshots from life, but others were posed. Posed in ways I had never seen myself in before, angles I had never thought to take. It was like he had recreated moments from memory, from pictures I didn't even know existed. I noticed something else. The photos were in order, almost chronological. From childhood to now, arranged perfectly across the walls, almost like a timeline. My life, framed and displayed without my consent. I wanted to leave. I wanted to yell at him, to scream, to break something, to smash the frames and run. But the layout of the room felt trapping. The way he had positioned the furniture, the narrow path between the couch and the wall, it was like he had designed the space specifically for someone to be surrounded by these images. He followed me as I walked, but not too close, just enough to watch. His smile stayed the same, calm, patient, like he had been expecting me to react this way. I stopped in front of a photo of me from when I was 16, standing in front of my school. I remembered that day clearly. I had worn a blue hoodie, my hair tied back, and I had been holding a notebook I liked. That exact notebook, in that exact pose, was in the frame. I turned to him, searching for some explanation, some reassurance that this was some kind of joke, maybe a weird obsession or prank. He tilted his head slightly, smiling. He didn't speak. The room felt smaller the longer I stayed. My breathing was heavy. My hands were trembling. Every frame I looked at, every picture, reinforced this sense of being watched, tracked, mapped. My entire life laid out on his walls. I moved to the corner, trying to get a better angle on some of the older photos. There were pictures from places I hadn't been in years, some I hadn't told anyone about. Family trips, school plays, random moments at the park. How could he have known? How could anyone have known? I wanted to leave. My feet felt heavy, like I was glued to the floor. The photos seemed to follow me as I moved. The angles shifted subtly when I blinked. The frames caught in the light differently, highlighting parts of my face I didn't recognize. He walked closer, just a few steps, nothing threatening, but it felt deliberate. I could feel his eyes on me from behind. I tried to think of a way out without looking at the walls again. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't dare pull it out. Part of me was afraid it might show him something, or he might notice if I tried to call someone. I finally turned to him, decision made, and said I had to go. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was shaking, uneven, like I had been holding it in too long. He didn't object. He just smiled and nodded, almost like he was disappointed I was leaving. I walked toward the door, each step heavy, each frame along the way burning itself into my memory. The hallway leading out felt longer than it should have, the narrow stairwell like a funnel. When I finally stepped outside, the night air hit me, crisp and real. I didn't stop to look back. I ran down the street, not even caring about shoes or where I was going, just away from that flat, away from him, away from the walls of my life displayed like some twisted gallery. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the images from my mind. I can picture each frame, each angle, each expression. I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see one of those photos following me, sliding into the real world like some kind of shadow. I never went back to that part of town. I never answered his messages. Sometimes late at night, I imagine opening my front door and seeing one of those frames leaning against it, my own face staring back at me. It started out like every other first date I'd been on. Awkward, a little funny, mostly me trying too hard to look normal. I met him at this small coffee shop on the corner of a street I barely ever walked down, the kind of place with old wood tables and dim lighting that made everything feel a little cinematic. He seemed nice enough at first, smiled too much maybe, but in that way that makes you think someone actually cares about what you're saying. We ordered lats, picked a table by the window, and I tried not to spill mine as I laughed at some joke I couldn't remember making. Everything was normal. We talked about music, movies, where we grew up. He asked me about my favorite places to hang out in the city, and I told him a few random spots I loved walking alone. He nodded like he understood, like he'd been there before. It didn't seem odd at the time, but thinking back now, that's the first thing that creeps me out. He didn't just nod. He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to react, like he'd memorized me. After an hour or so, he suggested we take a selfie. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. He pulled out his phone and held it up, angling it over our heads. I leaned in, smiling the way you do when you're trying to look casual in a picture. He said something about lighting and tilting it a little, and I laughed, adjusted, and braced for the click. He snapped the photo and handed me his phone so I could check it. And I froze. I was alone. The coffee shop behind me, the table, the window, even the warm sunlight streaming in, I was alone. No one else in the frame. The chair next to me was empty. The latte I just sipped was there, the same way I'd left it, but he was gone. Every angle, every pixel, just me sitting there like someone had erased him from existence. I looked up at him, my heart pounding, thinking maybe he was joking. Maybe it was some weird filter, some phone glitch. But he wasn't smiling. He wasn't holding his phone. He was just there, standing a few inches from me, calm, like nothing was strange. I took the phone back, trying to shake it off, maybe looking at the wrong photo. But every picture was the same. Every single one, me alone. I started to feel this cold knot in my stomach, the kind that sits there and won't leave. My brain kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a reflection thing, a delayed camera shutter, a trick of the lighting. But none of it made sense. I remembered him leaning in for the photo. I remembered his arm brushing mine. I remembered the click, and the click had left only me. I tried to speak, but my voice felt weird. Weak. I just stared at him, and he smiled softly, like he had done nothing wrong. That's when I noticed something else. The shadows around him didn't match. The light coming from the window hit the table and my latte just right, but he cast no shadow. Not a hint. Nothing. I backed up a little, trying to make sense of it. He didn't move. He didn't react. Just watched, his smile steady, like he was waiting for me to realize something I didn't understand yet. I looked around the coffee shop. Everyone else seemed normal. Couples laughing, baristas moving behind the counter, someone on their laptop typing away. But the moment my eyes flicked back to him, my chest tightened. I couldn't place it at first, but there was something off about the way he looked at me. Not his eyes, his face. It wasn't exactly wrong, but not quite right either. Like a photograph of someone trying to copy a person from memory, every detail slightly. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd read too many creepy stories online. Maybe the coffee was too strong. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. I asked if he wanted to walk around a bit. I needed to get out of the chair, out of the frame, out of that strange static air between us. He agreed immediately, too willingly, and we stepped out onto the street. The city felt normal, cars passing, people walking dogs, the low hum of life, but I couldn't shake the photo from my mind. We wandered down a side street, narrow, lined with shops closed for the evening. He suggested another selfie. I hesitated, and he tilted his head, that same patient, unnerving smile. I gave in. The same thing happened. Alone. It wasn't subtle this time. The street behind me, the pavement, the dim glow from the closed shop windows, he was just gone. The world was the same, but he wasn't in it. My fingers shook as I handed him the phone back, desperate to understand, desperate to break some kind of logic that wasn't there. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just smiled, like nothing had happened. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab the first cab, any cab, and leave. But something rooted me to the spot. Something that felt like a trap, like my body knew it couldn't move without permission. I started paying attention to small things. The way his shoes didn't scuff against the pavement. The way his hand never seemed to cast a shadow in the streetlight. The way his reflection never appeared in the shop windows as we walked past. It wasn't all the time, just little flashes, moments I couldn't ignore. I tried talking to him about it. Tried asking questions without words, just gestures, panicked looks. But he didn't respond the way a person should. He nodded when I stopped abruptly, waited silently when I backed away. Always the same calm, the same smile, the same wrongness. We ended up at a small park, empty, just before nightfall. The swing swayed gently in the wind. The benches were empty. I thought about making a run for it, about bolting across the grass and never looking back, but I froze again when he lifted his phone, ready for another picture. And I realized something horrifying. No matter where we were, no matter what angle, the photos were always going to leave me alone. He could appear, stand next to me, whisper things, brush my arm. The camera would never capture him. Not because he wasn't there, but because he didn't want to be. Because I wasn't supposed to see him in any frame but real life. I didn't take another selfie. I didn't even want to. We walked back in silence after that, my heart hammering, my mind spinning. He kept that same eerie patience, like he had been doing this for years, like it was nothing to him that I was unraveling. When we reached the coffee shop again, I told him I had to go. He didn't argue. Didn't even try to walk me to the street. He just watched as I walked away, his smile unwavering like he had won some silent game. I looked over my shoulder once, and he was just standing there perfectly still. No shadow, no reflection. Just a smile that seemed to stretch a little too wide, just enough to make me remember the way the photos had been alone. I didn't sleep well that night. I keep thinking about that camera, about what it saw and what it didn't. About him standing there, perfectly normal, while the phone erased him completely. I still carry the photos on my phone, though I can't bring myself to open them too often. Just me sitting alone, smiling. Alone, except for him, somewhere just out of frame watching. Sometimes when I walk past a mirror or a shop window, I catch a glimpse of something behind me and I know it's him. Always just behind the corner of my vision. Waiting. Smiling. I met him at this little diner just off a street I barely knew, the kind of place with red vinyl booths, greasy menus, and the smell of fried food that sticks to your clothes. I was late, of course, and he was already sitting there, looking way too calm for someone who had apparently been waiting. He waved me over like we'd known each other forever, and I thought maybe that was just charm, but now I'm not so sure. At first, it was normal. Coffee, small talk about music, work, how long I'd lived in the city. He laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, and I felt that stupid relief you get when a date seems like it might actually go okay. But then, out of nowhere, the questions started. It wasn't casual stuff, like favorite movies or the last trip I'd taken. No, he started asking about fire. He wanted to know exactly what I'd do if the diner caught on fire, where I'd go, how I'd escape, what I'd grab first. I thought maybe he was joking at first, testing me, the kind of morbid curiosity people sometimes have. I laughed nervously and gave the obvious answer, run, stay calm, get out, but he didn't nod and move on. He leaned closer, and his eyes got this weird intensity, like he wasn't just asking for fun. He wanted details. The kind of details you only think about when you're alone and terrified. Then he moved on to drowning. He asked if I could swim, and then how I'd handle being caught in a current, what I'd do if someone went under right in front of me. I tried to laugh again, to make it casual, but it felt wrong, like the air had changed. I felt my stomach tighten. The waitress brought more coffee, and he didn't pause. He just kept talking, asking more, probing like he was mapping out something I couldn't see. By the time he started asking about being buried alive, I realized I couldn't just brush it off. It was the kind of question you only ask if you've imagined it happening. My hands were shaking a little as I tried to answer, thinking maybe if I kept talking, I could make it seem normal that I wasn't panicking. But it didn't matter. He didn't laugh, didn't change the subject. He just nodded slowly, like he was filing it all away somewhere. I started noticing little things around me that I hadn't before. The diner felt smaller, tighter somehow, like the walls were closing in. The clatter of dishes sounded louder. The hum of the fridge in the corner seemed closer. I kept trying to convince myself it was just nerves, that it was normal to feel anxious on a first date. But the questions didn't stop, and neither did the way he was staring at me. Not in a creepy, obvious way, more like he was calculating, waiting to see something in my reactions, and I realized I couldn't escape it without leaving. I tried to shift the conversation to something else. Music, movies, silly stuff, anything to distract him from this line of questioning. But every time I tried, he steered it back. He asked what I'd do if a fire started in my apartment, if the building flooded, if someone trapped me underground. Every scenario was more specific, more detailed than the last, and I felt like I was being examined. Not like a date, not like someone flirting, but like a test. The diner was emptying out as the evening went on, and I started to notice other things. The waiters and a few late customers kept glancing at our table, lingering too long. Not the normal look of curiosity, but the kind that feels like they're seeing more than they should. I looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. He just kept asking, calm, casual, like nothing was off. His face didn't change at all, but there was something locked behind his eyes that made me feel like I was being watched from all sides. I tried to finish my coffee quickly, hoping to get out, but he asked one last scenario before I could make a move. He wanted to know what I'd do if I were trapped in a room with no way out, if smoke filled the air and the walls started closing in. And in that moment, everything clicked. Every small detail I'd ignored, the way he never ate, the way he observed me, the intensity in his questions, it all made sense in the worst way. I wasn't just on a date, I was being assessed. I got up and said I needed to leave. I didn't explain why. I didn't care if he got it or not. I walked toward the door and he didn't stop me. He just smiled that same calm, almost proud smile, like he had been expecting me to react this way. Outside, the city felt normal, bright streetlights, cars honking, people laughing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been following me through the diner. I kept looking over my shoulder as I walked home, half expecting to see him emerge from the shadows, waiting for the next question. My chest felt tight, my hands cold, and I had this sensation like my skin was crawling, like I could feel eyes on me even when there was no one there. I didn't want to look back at the diner, but I couldn't help myself. From across the street, the windows were dark, empty, nothing inside. But I swear I saw a shadow move in the corner, like he was still sitting there, still waiting, still watching, cataloging every possible scenario in which I could panic. When I got home, I locked the door and sat on the floor in the dark. My mind replayed every question, every pause, every little detail he had observed. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about what would have happened if I'd answered differently, if I'd hesitated, if I'd laughed or cried. I kept imagining him in those scenarios with me always calm, always observing, always testing. I don't know why he was asking. I don't know what he wanted to learn. All I know is that the questions weren't normal, and neither was him. The way he spoke, the way he waited, the way he cataloged everything. It was methodical, precise, and it felt like he had been doing this to people for a long time. I haven't gone on another date since then. I haven't seen him again, and part of me hopes I never will. But sometimes when I'm alone, I catch myself imagining those scenarios, fire, drowning, being buried alive, and I can't help thinking about how calmly he would watch, how meticulously he would measure my reactions, how nothing I did would escape his attention. Even now, months later, I can feel it. The lingering sensation that someone is analyzing me, evaluating me, waiting to see how I respond to danger, how I panic, how I struggle. And the worst part is that I don't even know if he's real or just a projection of everything I feared that night. I thought I was just doing a normal thing, driving someone home after a first date. The night had gone better than I expected. She was funny, easy to talk to, and somehow made the long walk from the diner to my car feel short. I was feeling that stupid post-date optimism, thinking maybe I'd actually met someone who didn't make me want to run the second we said goodbye. Her address was saved in my GPS, which I rarely use unless I'm somewhere totally new. I punched it in, adjusted the mirrors, and started driving. At first, everything felt normal. Neighborhood streets, streetlights, occasional late-night cars. She was telling me about her work, laughing at the tiny frustrations of her day, and I was half listening, half watching the GPS, which had this calm, computerized voice that I never thought much about until that night. The first weird thing was the first reroute. I had made a wrong turn on a street I thought I knew, and the GPS adjusted. Fine. Happens all the time. I corrected it, and then it rerouted again, back on a street I didn't recognize. I looked around. The houses were older, smaller, almost identical, but there was something off about them. They were too still, too quiet, like they weren't part of the city I knew. She was talking about something, but I wasn't paying attention. My stomach started to twist a little. Then the GPS routed again, this time down a narrow road I swear didn't exist. I checked my phone, thinking maybe the map was outdated, but the map showed nothing, just empty gray. I laughed nervously, trying to make it seem casual. She leaned closer, asking if I was okay, and I shrugged. I didn't want to freak her out. We kept driving. The streetlights became fewer and farther between. Trees leaned in closer over the road, branches scratching the roof of the car. The houses disappeared completely, replaced by dark, dense woods. The GPS still insisted we were on the right path. Every time I slowed down or tried to turn around, it recalculated and led me deeper. I tried to ask her questions, make conversation, keep the mood normal. But every time I did, she smiled too easily, like she knew something I didn't. Her seatbelt was tight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She wasn't looking at the dark trees or the way the road twisted unnaturally. She was staring straight ahead, eyes bright and calm, and I started to notice that her presence was oddly unnerving in that emptiness. The GPS kept recalculating. I tried to exit to find another road, but it insisted, voice calm and confident, that we were going the correct way. There were no signs, no markings, nothing that looked like a real road, just the asphalt, dark and cracked, cutting through the forest. I started gripping the steering wheel tighter. I wanted to laugh it off, tell myself it was just a glitch, a weird mapping error, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. The air in the car felt heavier, like the night outside had started pressing in on the windows. I turned on the high beams. Nothing. The road stretched forward, nothing familiar, no street signs, no houses, no lights except for what my car made. I glanced at her, thinking maybe she could tell me what was going on. She smiled at me and said nothing. Not a word. And that's when the first real panic set in. I wanted to turn back. I turned the wheel, hoping to retrace my path, but the GPS recalculated instantly, guiding me forward again. I checked my phone. Full battery, GPS signal strong. No other roads showed up on the map. It was like we had been swallowed by some hidden place that didn't exist, or maybe existed somewhere that the world didn't acknowledge. She leaned closer and asked me if I trusted her directions. The way she said it was casual, but there was something in her voice that made my stomach tighten. I realized I hadn't actually noticed her giving directions. She hadn't said a word the whole ride, not about the road, not about where we were going. I started asking questions out loud, trying to break the silence, trying to force normality, but my words echoed weirdly in the stillness of the car, swallowed by the darkness outside. The road started narrowing, branches scraping the windows, rocks appearing in the asphalt, cracks widening into something that looked like fissures. My hands were sweaty on the wheel, knuckles white. I kept thinking about turning around, but every time I did, the GPS recalculated, forcing me further in. I realized I didn't even know where home was anymore. The forest had no edges, no landmarks, just trees leaning in, shadows twisting like they were alive. She said something quiet, almost a whisper, and I realized it wasn't her. The words were faint, like a hiss from the GPS speaker. It said, continue, over and over, calm, insistent. I looked at her. She was smiling, calm as ever, her eyes fixed straight ahead. I wanted to ask her if she could see what was happening, and she felt it too. But I couldn't. Her calmness made the fear worse. We drove for what felt like hours. No houses, no other cars, nothing but dark trees and asphalt that wound in impossible ways. I checked the gas, the time, my phone. Everything seemed normal, ordinary metrics, but the world outside was unrecognizable. I started thinking about where this road would end. I imagined every horrible possibility, each one worse than the last, each more unreal than the last. Finally, I slowed down, gripping the wheel so hard it hurt, trying to force the car onto a small dirt path that looked like it led back to civilization. The GPS screamed, recalculating, voice calm but insistent. I looked over at her. She tilted her head, smile still perfect, eyes unblinking, and I realized she wasn't worried. She wasn't afraid, and that's when I knew she had led me here. Somehow, all of this had been her plan, and she was perfectly fine with it. The tree started leaning even closer, branches scraping against the car, leaves tapping against the windshield like fingernails. The path ahead became darker, twisting into impossibilities, as if the road itself had a mind. I could see no way forward, no way back, and every instinct in me screamed to get out, to escape. but the GPS forced me on. I realized with a sickening clarity that I was not in charge anymore. The car, the road, maybe even the night itself, had been taken over by something else. And yet she remained calm, watching, smiling, not saying a word, just letting it happen, letting me drive further into this unreal place. The moonlight filtered through the trees, highlighting patches of road that didn't make sense, turning the shadows into impossible shapes. I kept trying to speak, to ask questions, to demand something, anything, but she didn't respond, and the GPS didn't either. Eventually, I noticed a faint glow ahead. At first, I thought it was civilization, a streetlight, something normal. But as we got closer, I realized it was wrong. The glow came from the trees themselves, faint, unnatural, and the branches seemed to part for us, like the forest was alive, aware of our presence. My hands shook on the wheel. She reached out lightly, touching my arm, calm as ever, and I felt my panic twist into something else, something deeper, heavier, like I couldn't fight anymore. The GPS finally stopped recalculating, silent now, but there was no map, no destination. Just this glow, this impossible, unnatural place. I realized I was no longer driving anywhere I could recognize, and she smiled at me again, and I realized that wherever this place was, she had brought me here on purpose, guiding me into something I couldn't understand but would never forget. I parked the car as the glow surrounded us. The forest seemed to hum, leaves whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I turned to her looking for answers, for some sign that any of this was real, but she just leaned back, calm, as if this was normal, and I realized that this night, this ride, had nothing to do with the world I knew. I don't know how long we sat there. I don't know if anyone else could find that road, or if it existed on any map, in any city at all. All I know is that I didn't drive her home. Not really. I was led somewhere else, somewhere that the world outside wouldn't acknowledge. And she just smiled, calm, perfectly calm, as if that was the way things were supposed to be. I wasn't expecting much from this first date. I had met him through one of those apps where everyone seemed slightly too polished, but he seemed normal enough. We agreed to meet at a downtown bar around 9. I got there first, picked a booth near the back, and watched the place fill with the usual late-night crowd. People laughing, glasses clinking, bartenders yelling over music that was loud but not unbearable. I felt that kind of low-grade excitement you get when you're about to meet someone new, the weird mix of anticipation and nerves that makes your stomach flip a little. He showed up looking exactly like his pictures, which I appreciated because I had one too many experiences where online profiles and reality didn't match. He smiled, I smiled, and we slid into the booth. At first, everything was normal. He asked about my day, we swapped stories, laughed at the dumb little frustrations we both had. He seemed charming in a low-key way, nothing overwhelming, nothing that screamed red flags. Then he started talking about meeting his friends. He said they were just around the corner at another table, and he wanted me to meet them. I nodded, thinking, okay, sure, that's fine. He got up, walked a few steps, and waved at people around a cluster of tables. I looked over, but the area he was pointing to was just normal bar patrons, a mix of people talking, drinking, playing pool. I didn't recognize anyone, and no one waved back, no one smiled, no one acknowledged him at all. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe he had new friends I didn't know, maybe they weren't expecting me yet. He gestured enthusiastically, and I followed him. As we got closer, he started introducing me by name, pointing to individuals, saying what they did, what they liked. Each time he did, I realized something disturbing. None of the people he pointed at were even looking at him, let alone responding. One guy I swore I saw glance at us, but when I blinked, he was staring down at his drink, as if we weren't there. He pulled a chair up for me anyway, motioning to one of the empty spots, saying that's where I'd sit. I sat, trying to force casualness, and he began telling stories involving his friends. Stories that were funny, oddly detailed, things like they went camping together, played pranks on each other, supported each other through hard times. I looked around, expecting maybe they were shy, maybe just quiet. But everyone else in the bar carried on as if nothing was happening, paying us no mind at all. I started noticing little things. The people he called his friends didn't react at all to me. I'd said something funny or awkward, expecting maybe a smile, a glance, even the slightest acknowledgement. Nothing. just silence, and not polite silence, like people weren't ignoring me. They literally didn't exist in the world outside of him. The waiter walked past us, dropping orders for other tables, laughing with customers, but no glance in our direction, like the space we occupied didn't exist to anyone but him. I tried to make small talk with the friends he had pointed out, asking about some of the stories he told, but my words were met with nothing. I realized then that I was only talking to air. He laughed along with me, saying something in response to the empty chair next to me, and my stomach twisted. It was one thing to realize his friends were quiet, another to realize they weren't there at all, except in his head. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, and it didn't matter. He was relaxed, like this was totally normal, like he had invited me into a world that only he could see. I felt my throat tighten, my heart rate climb, but I tried to keep it casual. I sipped my drink, nodded at nothing, forced a smile. Every instinct screamed that I should leave, but I couldn't quite figure out how to excuse myself without drawing attention from him. The bar music changed, a slow, scratchy song that made the lights seem dimmer. The friends all remained unmoving, faceless, silent. He kept talking about past trips, stories about birthdays, inside jokes I couldn't possibly understand. He gestured to someone over there, pointed out the way they laughed at something he said earlier, and I realized I couldn't hear any laughter. I couldn't even see anyone's lips move. I kept looking around for clues, scanning the bar. Everyone else was doing normal bar stuff. Chatting, drinking, laughing at the TV screen showing some late-night game. They didn't notice us, didn't notice him, didn't notice the empty chairs or the imaginary people I could only see through his gestures. I started to feel trapped, like I had stepped into a space that obeyed a different set of rules, where the normal world stopped at the edge of the booth. He ordered another round of drinks, not for me, not for himself, but for his friends. I watched as the waiter walked past, completely oblivious, and nothing arrived. He poured drinks into invisible glasses, handed them out, laughed along as if they were there, shearing, clinking cups. My stomach flipped. This wasn't just weird. It was horrifying. I realized he was treating them as real, really real. Like he could see them in a way that I couldn't, like they existed in a layer of reality that I had no access to. Time seemed to stretch. I don't know if it was minutes or hours. I tried to focus on him, to get some sense of normalcy, but everything he did involved them. He asked one to hand him a coaster, another to try a joke he had told me earlier. He laughed when someone supposedly made a face, and I realized I couldn't even imagine what they looked like. I couldn't grasp their presence, and that made me feel insane. The rest of the bar went on normally. The bartender slammed down drinks. People argued about teams. Someone dropped a coin. Someone laughed too loud. None of them saw us. None of them reacted. And yet he was so completely absorbed in the invisible circle of his friends, talking to them, including me in ways that made no sense, like I was supposed to see them too. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and sighed, happy content, like this was the perfect night. I looked at him trying to understand, trying to find a clue about how I could escape. But he wasn't concerned with me, not really. He was in his own world, a bubble layered over the normal bar. And I realized that if I left, I would be leaving his world, stepping back into mine. But leaving would also mean acknowledging that he could create this reality and I couldn't follow. I tried to focus on something tangible, the bar, the people, the drink in my hand. But the minute I did, his smile, his gestures, his laughter at something no one else could see, pulled me back into that invisible circle. I felt my mind twisting, trying to reconcile the reality I could touch with the reality he inhabited. He kept talking about his friends like they were alive, interacting with me, including me, but nothing matched up. I was the only one trapped in both worlds at once, aware of one and seeing shadows of another. I finally excused myself, using the excuse of needing air, needing to call someone. I walked to the door, felt the normal street outside, breathed in cold night air. I looked back, half expecting to see him still at the booth with his imaginary friends, perfectly normal, perfectly happy. And he was. The bar was visible, the people were visible, but no one else saw him. He smiled at me, waved, and continued his conversations, pointing to chairs I could no longer see. I drove home in silence, my stomach tight. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just seen. He had created a private world layered on top of reality, invisible to everyone else. And I had been allowed in, briefly, just enough to see it, to be included, to feel like I didn't exist at the same time he existed fully. The night didn't end with screaming or running. It ended with a calm smile and the unshakable sense that some people live in a world others will never touch, a world that obeys rules no one else knows. I haven't heard from him again. I don't know if I want to, but I still see them sometimes, the empty chairs, the invisible friends, the way he included me and made me feel part of a reality I could never enter again. I met her at a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and old books, one of those places that feels like it's been stuck in the same decade for too long. She was sitting in the corner, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone like she had nowhere else to be. I noticed her because she had this odd calm about her, like she knew exactly how the world worked and everyone else was fumbling around. I don't usually go for people like that, but something about the way she looked up and smiled when I approached made me sit anyway. I didn't think anything could go wrong over coffee, right? At first, she was normal. We talked about small stuff, classes, movies we liked, dumb little personal details that feel like you're connecting, but not really. And then she leaned in and said something that made my stomach drop without me realizing why. She asked me not to blink while we were talking. I laughed it off, thought she was joking, but there was no joke in her eyes. The way she stared at me, like she could see right through the parts of me I hadn't even admitted to myself, made my face hot. I nodded, thinking it was probably just a weird quirk, a game to make conversation memorable. At first, it was fine. I stared at her, and she stared back, smiling like everything in the world was a private joke we were both in on. Time felt normal, a little slow maybe, but normal. Then she asked a question about something personal, something small, and I realized my eyes were drying up. I blinked, just once, to wet them. When I opened my eyes, the coffee shop was different. The sun had moved drastically. The shadows along the walls were long and harsh, and the place was almost empty now. People had moved, cleaned up, shifted tables, and I hadn't noticed a thing. I felt my chest tighten, my hands clenching the edge of the table. She was still sitting there, perfectly calm, smiling like nothing had changed. I asked myself if maybe I had just dozed off for a second, but my drink hadn't cooled down enough for that to make sense. I tried to focus, to watch her every tiny movement, to not blink, but it became impossible. She asked me questions in that same soft, knowing tone, and I tried to answer, but my voice sounded distant in my own ears. I could feel minutes stretching into hours, but I had no way to track it. The light outside shifted in ways that didn't make sense for the time I thought had passed. My coffee had grown cold, my stomach was starting to ache, and I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. She kept talking about things that didn't matter, little stories, little details about her life that seemed mundane but had a way of pulling me in. Each time I blinked, even the tiniest flicker, hours passed. I tried to cheat once, closing my eyes for what felt like a second, and when I opened them, the barista was locking up, sweeping the floor, and the windows were dark with street lights reflecting. I realized then that time wasn't flowing normally around her, that my own body was moving through hours like stepping through puddles of water while she stayed anchored in a single moment. I was exhausted. My eyes burned. My neck cramped from staring, my back ached. My mind felt like it was stretched thin, taffy being pulled apart. And still she talked, moving her hands subtly, gesturing like she could hold hours in them, molding them, bending them. I wanted to leave, to run, to tell her I couldn't do it, but my body felt like it was stuck under some invisible weight. Every time I blinked, a new hour or two had passed, and the world outside continued its normal rhythm while I was trapped in this loop. The people outside the coffee shop started moving faster, but I couldn't tell if it was real life or my perception breaking. She didn't age, didn't blink, didn't shift in any noticeable way. I watched her smile, watched her eyes flicker in the lamplight, and I realized she wasn't human in the normal sense. I don't mean she was fake or a ghost. I mean she was something that existed in a layer of reality where time didn't apply, where moments could be pulled like threads from the fabric of existence and stretched or compressed at will. I tried to make small talk, tried to ask her how this worked, what was going on, but my words didn't land the way they should. It was like I was shouting into a void that only responded with her voice, calm and constant. Each time I blinked, hours passed, and I could feel my body weakening, hunger and thirst creeping in. My phone had been on the table. I hadn't checked it in what felt like minutes, and when I did, the battery was dead. The time displayed was hours ahead of the clock in the coffee shop, ahead of reality outside the window. I realized then that my perception had become unreliable. I couldn't trust my own senses. I couldn't trust the sun, the shadows, my own pulse. Every time I blinked, she waited patiently, perfectly aware that hours had slipped past me unnoticed. She seemed entertained by it, amused by the fact that I was trapped in this cycle. And I understood that this wasn't a casual game. This wasn't a weird first date story to tell friends. It was something else entirely, something that could trap me in a loop I couldn't escape. Hours blurred together, and I lost track of which hour was real, which hour had passed while I tried to keep my eyes open. My hands shook as I rested them on the table, trying to stay present, trying not to blink, trying to hold on to something that felt like reality. The coffee shop's lights dimmed and brightened in ways that didn't make sense, shadows moving too fast or too slow. I started to notice small details I hadn't before, like the way her eyes reflected light that didn't exist, the way her smile stayed fixed, fluid, impossible. I thought about excuses, ways to get out, but leaving seemed impossible. I had to blink eventually. My eyes were dried, my vision blurred, my throat dry from trying to speak. Each time I fought it, I felt the pull of hours passing like waves crashing against me. My body aged in tiny increments with each blink, and I couldn't stop it. I realized then that this wasn't just about staring. This was about control, about forcing me to experience reality differently, to experience time the way she did, to understand her world and my lack of agency within it. By the end, I couldn't track how long I had been there. My head hurt, my eyes stung, my body felt like it had been moving through water for 1,000 hours. She finally leaned back, smiled that same calm, knowing smile, and I blinked one last time without thinking. The room was quiet, normal now, lights steady, people moving around as they had always moved. My phone buzzed, and the coffee shop looked ordinary, the sun outside normal, and I realized she had left. No goodbye, no note, no trace of the hours that had passed except for the burning in my eyes and the tight ache in my chest. I walked home slowly, feeling detached from the world, wondering if I had been gone for hours or if the time she had stolen would catch up with me later. I kept checking my phone, the street, the people, anything to see if reality had shifted, if something had changed in the hours I had lost. Nothing had. And I couldn't shake the thought that the next time I met someone like her, the hours wouldn't return at all, that they would belong to her completely, and I would just exist in a loop I couldn't escape. I didn't think much about it at first. The night had started normal enough, meeting her at this little diner tucked in the corner of downtown, neon lights buzzing outside, the smell of greasy fries, and strong coffee thick in the air. She had this laugh that felt like it belonged in a different, easier world, and I thought I'd struck gold just being invited out. We talked about random stuff at first, music, classes, movies, nothing heavy, nothing personal, just enough to feel like a first date should feel. I remember feeling comfortable, like I could just slip into the rhythm of conversation. No awkward pauses, no forced laughs. Somewhere in the middle of my third drink, I felt that familiar pressure in my bladder that can't wait. I excused myself, telling her I'd be right back. She smiled, waved it off, and I got up. The diner was quiet, just the low hum of the neon and the clatter of utensils behind the counter. The bathroom door creaked as I pushed it open, the tiles cool under my shoes, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Everything was fine, ordinary. I washed my hands, splashed cold water on my face, and felt the tension of sitting finally drain out. When I opened the bathroom door to leave, I noticed the hall seemed longer than it should have been. The diner wasn't big. The back exit shouldn't have stretched into this narrow corridor, but I ignored it. Maybe the tile pattern was throwing me off. Maybe my brain was just tired. I walked back into the main dining area, expecting to see her still sitting there, sipping her drink, laughing at whatever Joe had left behind. Except she wasn't there. I froze for a second, scanning the empty booth, the neon flickering, the lone waitress wiping down the counter. My stomach tightened. I stepped closer, and suddenly she appeared, smiling exactly like she had when I excused myself. She didn't seem surprised, didn't move, just looked at me with the same calm expression. She asked me if everything was okay, but there was something off. The light on her face was soft, warm even, but her eyes were steady, unblinking, like she'd been watching me the whole time. I told her I'd just been in the bathroom, and she laughed, this small, almost hollow laugh, and said I hadn't left. I blinked, thinking it was a joke. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The minute hand hadn't moved. It was exactly the same time I'd excused myself. My stomach dropped. I walked out the front door of the diner to check the real time on my phone, thinking maybe the clock inside was broken. My phone read the same exact minute. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind felt like it had stalled, every thought moving in slow motion while my body tried to catch up. The diner seemed normal, the lights, the chairs, the smell of fries, everything, but it all felt wrong. Too clean, too bright, like a picture of a diner you'd seen in a magazine. I looked back at the booth. She hadn't moved an inch. Her eyes followed me, calm, patient, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. I sat back down, hoping maybe it was some weird timing thing, maybe a coincidence. I tried to talk to her, tried to ask if she had noticed anything weird, tried to make sense of it, but the words felt heavy in my throat. I couldn't understand how minutes had passed for me but not for her, or if I'd even left at all. The waitress came over to check on us, but she didn't notice anything odd. She smiled, wrote something on her pad, walked away. The world outside continued its normal rhythm through the windows, the street lights flickering, cars moving, people passing, but inside, time seemed locked. I excused myself again, thinking maybe I'd just misread the clock before. I needed to check, to see if stepping away would reset things. I pushed the bathroom door open. The tiles stretched endlessly now, the fluorescent lights buzzing in patterns that weren't there before. I walked back into the diner and she was exactly the same. No matter how many steps I took, no matter how far I tried to go, when I returned to her, she hadn't aged a second. Her coffee hadn't cooled, her hands hadn't moved. I blinked, and I think that's when I realized. Leaving didn't matter. Time didn't matter. I started watching the diner like a hawk. Every movement outside, every blink of the neon sign, every flicker of light should have been something I could count on. But nothing changed. I tried to pull out my phone again, checked messages, scrolled through time-stamped apps, anything to anchor myself in reality. Every timestamp said the same, every second frozen, every hour irrelevant. I felt a panic rising, low and slow, curling around my stomach. I was stuck in a space that was familiar, normal, safe even, but entirely unreal. I tried to stand up to leave again, but my body felt heavier, like gravity had doubled without warning. I looked at her face again. She smiled, and I swear the warmth in her eyes had a weight to it, like gravity itself came from her gaze. I wanted to ask her what was happening, but my voice came out small, almost swallowed by the diner's ambient noise. It didn't matter. She didn't need me to speak. She already knew. She had always known. Hours. Minutes. I couldn't tell. I was trapped in the loop of stepping away and returning, each time the same result. I realized that my attempts to leave were pointless. She existed outside of time, anchored in the same moment, and I was tied to her perception. Each time I blinked, each time I hesitated, the clock, the world, and everyone else didn't move for me. I could feel my body aging, stretching, weakening, but nothing else shifted. The diner remained perfect, immaculate, unchanging. I tried reasoning with myself, tried mapping out the timeline, trying to reconcile what had happened with the laws I'd always known about reality. The bathroom, the act of leaving, the simple human act of stepping away, all meaningless. She was the center, the anchor, and I was caught in orbit, spinning slower, heavier, more disoriented. I tried to look for clues, anything abnormal about her or the diner, but there was nothing. She blended in perfectly with reality, yet reality had no power over her. I thought about asking the waitress to verify, to confirm what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. Even if they did, would it have mattered? The clocks were all the same, frozen in a perfect moment. The neon buzzed, the coffee smelled the same, and her eyes followed me. Patient, calm, precise. I couldn't escape, and I couldn't anchor myself. Every attempt to measure time, to check, to leave had no effect. I was suspended in a moment that had no beginning or end. I eventually just sat back down, letting the world spin without me. The feeling of normalcy returned in small doses, the coffee in my hand, the distant hum of traffic, but underneath it was this awareness. She existed outside of reality, outside of time itself, and I was just a visitor caught in her orbit. I could blink, I could breathe, I could try to leave. The minute hand on the clock and the exact second on my phone would always agree with her. I never left. I finished my drink slowly, not because I wanted to, but because the diner demanded it, because my body forced the action. I realized I wasn't in control anymore. I was a passenger, anchored to a moment that wasn't mine, living through a first date that would never end or begin properly. When I finally got up to leave, the door opened, normally the street lights outside real, the wind cold on my face. She smiled once more, perfectly, and I felt the pull of the diner's frozen world tugging at my mind. I walked away, but I knew she was still there, still anchored to that single, unchanging moment, and I would never truly leave the memory of it. I was excited at first. I had met her online a few weeks before, and her pictures didn't lie. She was funny, weird in all the ways I liked, and had this energy that made waiting for the first date almost unbearable. We agreed on this little restaurant tucked into a side street nobody ever seemed to notice. It was the kind of place with mismatched chairs, low-hanging lights, and menus written in a language I didn't recognize. I thought it was quirky, cute, an adventure. When I walked in, she was already there, waiting like I'd been late by 5 minutes instead of half an hour. She was wearing this oversized jacket and had that smile that made me stupidly glad I had shown up early. We sat down, and I noticed immediately that the menu was strange. Symbols, characters I had never seen, words that twisted around each other like vines. I glanced at her, thinking she might explain, but she just picked it up like it was the most natural thing in the world. The waiter came, and she leaned forward. The words she used weren't anything I had ever heard before. The sounds were fluid, soft, almost musical, rolling off her tongue in a way that should have made me laugh, but it didn't. By the time she was done, the waiter nodded, smiled, and walked away. I stared at her, waiting for the translation, but she just grinned and said something in that same language, pointing at me like it was all perfectly normal. I laughed nervously, trying to respond, but nothing came out. I opened my mouth, tried to say, "I don't understand," tried to ask what she had ordered for me, but all that came out were sounds that weren't words in any language I knew. The first moment of panic hit me slowly, like a cold wave brushing my ankles. I tried again louder, but it was useless. The sentences I wanted to form in my head didn't make it past my lips. Every attempt to speak English twisted into this foreign sound, this strange tone that I couldn't control. She smiled like she knew exactly what was happening. She didn't seem worried, didn't move to comfort me. She just looked at me, the same strange calm in her eyes that made me wonder if she had done this before. The waiter brought over plates of food I had no idea how to identify. I poked at it with my fork, unsure if it was edible, unsure if I even had the words to ask what it was. I realized then that I wasn't just unable to speak. I couldn't think in English either. The words formed in my head, but when I tried to grasp them, they slipped away. It was like my brain had been rewired mid-conversation. I tried writing. I pulled out my phone, typed "what is this" into a notes app, and even that auto-corrected to strange symbols I didn't recognize. Panic started rising, a hot, wild thing in my chest. My throat burned from trying to speak, from swallowing words that refused to exist. I looked at her hoping, praying that she would break whatever spell this was, that she would laugh and explain, but she didn't. She just picked up her own chopsticks and started eating, humming softly in the same language. I couldn't stop staring at her hands, the rhythm of them moving. My eyes burned from trying to memorize patterns, sounds, movements. Every attempt to repeat the language she had spoken twisted further alien to me. It wasn't like learning a new language I could practice. It was like the one I had known before had been taken, replaced, erased. I realized that this wasn't just about ordering food. It was about control. Every bite, every sip, every attempt to respond, I was being pulled deeper into a world that wasn't mine. I thought about leaving. I tried to say, "I have to go," but it came out wrong. It was as if I had no authority over my own body, my own thoughts. I looked around the restaurant. No one else seemed to notice anything. The other tables were filled with normal people, chatting in normal languages, eating normal food. But my food, my existence, my voice, it all belonged to her, to that language, to whatever trap she had set. She smiled at me again, just this small, knowing tilt of her head, and I realized she had been waiting for this. The first date had never been about getting to know me. It had been about introducing me to something else, something older than me, something that needed me to unlearn everything I was. I tried to speak, tried to beg, tried to ask questions in English, but nothing came. Every sound that left me belonged to her, belonged to that language. Time passed. I couldn't tell how long. Minutes, hours, maybe seconds. They all blurred together because I couldn't mark them with words. I tried to laugh, tried to shrug it off, but the sounds themselves betrayed me. My own body became a puppet for sounds I didn't recognize, gestures I didn't intend. The restaurant was normal, the lights dimmed like normal, but my reality had shifted entirely. I had crossed a line I didn't know existed, and I was trapped on the other side. I looked down at the plate in front of me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was food or something else. I picked up the chopsticks and mimicked her movements, hoping copying her would make things stop. Every movement felt alien, like my muscles were learning a new dance without my consent. I chewed, but the taste didn't register in the way food should. My body functioned, but my mind didn't. Every swallow, every breath, every blink anchored me further into this unknown language, this unknown world. I tried to write again, scribbling frantically on a napkin, hoping that putting words down would bypass the mouth. But the symbols formed themselves, curling into shapes that made no sense, indecipherable even to me. I was alone in the way a person is alone when their own body betrays them, when the brain refuses to cooperate with everything they've ever known. I could see her perfectly calm, perfectly herself, and I realized that she was everything I wasn't anymore. My voice, my language, my existence had been consumed. The meal ended. I didn't know if it had taken 30 minutes or 3 hours. She placed her chopsticks down, smiled at me again, and I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything that would break the grip she had on me. But I had no words left. I left the restaurant in silence, every step echoing in a language I didn't recognize. The street outside looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. I knew I was speaking in a code that wasn't mine, thinking in a pattern I couldn't decipher. I realized I would never be the same. By the time I got home, I could no longer remember how English sounded in my head. I tried to call a friend, tried to explain what had happened, but every sound I made was wrong in ways that made no sense. I was alone with this new voice, this new reality. The date was over, but the effect wasn't. I was walking around my apartment speaking in a language that felt familiar only to her, and every mirror reflected a stranger staring back. I looked at my hands, tried to say my name, tried to anchor myself, but the letters wouldn't form. I could only repeat the sounds she had taught me without consent, the syllables of a tongue I didn't know I could speak. I realized then that the first date had never been a date at all. It had been an initiation, a way of pulling me into a world that wasn't mine. And the terrifying part, I had walked through the door willingly smiling, thinking it was just a normal night. Now I understood that some doors, once opened, don't let you go back. I thought the night was going well at first. We'd grabbed dinner at this little diner that smelled like fried onions and old coffee, and I was actually laughing more than I expected. He seemed normal, in a quiet, charming way, the kind of guy you think you could maybe trust. When we left, he insisted on walking me home. At first, I didn't mind. It was a cool evening, the kind that makes streetlights look like they're glowing just for you. I thought it was sweet that he wanted to make sure I got home safe. We started down my usual route, and everything felt normal for the first block. Then the second block came, and I started to notice something weird. We passed a corner I recognized, the little bakery that's been there forever. I remember pointing it out in my head, thinking that's funny. I didn't think we were going that way. But he just smiled and kept walking, like I hadn't noticed. I shrugged it off. Maybe we were taking a longer route. By the third block, my stomach started twisting. The streets started feeling oddly familiar. Not just similar, like in any neighborhood, but exactly the same as the first block we passed. Same cracked sidewalk, same street lamp flickering at the corner, same graffiti on the brick wall. I stopped and looked around, trying to keep it casual, trying to convince myself I was just imagining things. He kept walking, hands in his pockets, calm, like he had done this 100 times. I tried steering the conversation in my head. Normally, I would have asked questions or made some comment about the loop, but my voice caught in my throat. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I tried to look at street signs, but the names were all wrong or changing every time I blinked. Every street we turned onto led back to the same corner. I even tried doubling back for a second, pretending I was curious about a window display, and when I rejoined him, we were back at the first corner again. That's when panic started creeping in. I looked at him, and he was smiling, this small, calm smile like it was a game, and I realized it wasn't a game for me. I tried thinking logically, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn in my own neighborhood before. Maybe there was construction surrounding everything. Maybe I was tired. But the detail was too precise, too exact. Every tree, every crack, every bit of graffiti was identical. It was like the block had copied itself perfectly, and we were trapped inside it. I tried speeding up, thinking that if I could just get past this corner, we'd find the right street. But no matter which way we turned, the same corner appeared in front of me. I started to notice tiny details that made it worse. The street lamp flickered in the same rhythm, the sound of a distant siren always faded in at the same point, and even the way the trash cans were leaned against the curb was identical. Everything was frozen in time, looking around me, and he didn't seem to care. I started to ask him questions in my head, trying to figure out if he noticed. Maybe he knew a shortcut, maybe he could break the pattern. But his eyes stayed forward, fixed on some invisible horizon, calm as if the world looping around us was the most normal thing imaginable. I tried pointing to different streets, trying to suggest going left, right, anything, but he ignored all of it. It was like he wasn't even seeing the streets, like he was walking in some personal grid I couldn't access. Hours could have passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time felt wrong in the loop. I started to recognize the same shadows stretching across the pavement in the same way over and over. My shoes scraped against the asphalt in a rhythm that matched my panic, and I realized my legs were getting tired. My arms were sore from holding my bag tight. But the strangest thing was how calm he stayed. It wasn't a nervous calm or a forced polite calm. It was the kind of calm that comes from someone who knows something you don't, who understands something that defies the rules you've always lived by. I tried turning around, thinking I could break the cycle by walking in the opposite direction. But the moment I did, we ended up back on that first corner again. I started testing everything. I ran straight for a block, zigzagged, doubled back, even tried jumping up and down, and each time the same corner appeared in front of me. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my ears, every part of me screaming that something was very wrong. I started noticing low changes each loop. A shadow in the alley moved differently, like it was watching us, but when I turned, there was nothing. The flickering street lamp sometimes paused mid-flicker and then started again, perfectly synchronized to each loop. I realized then that the block itself was alive in a way, or at least responding to me, testing me, keeping me inside. And he walked through it like it was just a normal path home. I wanted to scream, but the words felt trapped in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs moved the way he wanted them to, slow and steady, obedient to the calm rhythm he walked in. I noticed the faint hum in the air, a vibration I hadn't noticed before, like the streets themselves were vibrating in perfect sync with his steps. Every time I blinked, the scene rearranged itself slightly, but always returned to that first corner. I started trying to think outside the block. Maybe if I focused on a specific landmark, I could escape. There was a tree at the corner with a knot in the bark, a red bike chained to a lamppost, a mailbox with peeling paint. I focused on them, tried to imagine stepping past them to freedom, but every loop returned me to the same scene. I realized then that my mind couldn't break the pattern. My senses were trapped in the block, my thoughts anchored by repetition, and he was the only constant outside of it. At one point, I think I stopped trying to resist. I just kept walking, letting him lead, my body moving in automatic compliance while my mind screamed. I didn't even notice if he looked at me anymore. The air smelled the same every loop, faintly of baked bread and asphalt. The streetlights flickered in perfect rhythm. The shadows moved just enough to remind me I wasn't imagining it. Eventually, I lost track of what real was. I started measuring time by his steps, by the flicker of the street lamp, by the rhythm of my own heart. Everything else ceased to exist. There was no street past the loop, no escape, only the corner, the same crack in the sidewalk, the same graffiti, the same street lamp. I realized then that it didn't matter where I lived or where I needed to go. The block was infinite in a way I couldn't describe, and he was the only one who understood it. I stopped questioning him. My brain stopped trying to resist. I just walked. I knew he was leading me somewhere, or maybe nowhere, but I didn't have the tools to fight it anymore. My hands hurt from gripping my bag, my feet were sore, my chest ached from trying to hold in panic. But he kept walking, calm, like this was a normal night, a normal walk. The infinite block wrapped around me, and I knew it would keep looping until he decided otherwise. Finally, I realized I would never get home in the sense I had before. Home wasn't a destination. It was just another corner that looked the same as the last, and the next and the next. I walked beside him, following in the rhythm, knowing I was trapped, knowing he was the only one untouched by the loop. The streetlights flickered, The same shadows stretched across the pavement, and I understood that some first dates aren't just bad nights. They're entrances into something that doesn't let you leave. I thought this was going to be a normal first date. We met at this old cafe downtown that had a weird mix of vintage and modern, the kind of place with dusty bookshelves, exposed pipes, and mirrors on every wall, so it looked bigger than it was. I had even told myself to chill out, to act casual, because first dates always make me a little jittery. I didn't think anything weird could happen in a coffee shop that smelled like espresso and baked bread. We sat across from each other at a little round table, the kind that barely fits 2 cups and a plate of pastries. I was distracted at first by the mirrors all around us. They reflected everything, multiple angles of the same table, the same chairs, the same random people walking past. At some point, I realized my own reflection in the mirror wasn't quite right. I thought it was my imagination. I leaned forward, smiled, and waved to see if my reflection would copy me. It didn't. Instead, it tilted its head the way my date was tilting his. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a weird angle. Maybe the lighting was messing with me. But it kept happening. Every movement my date made, my reflection mirrored, perfectly sensed, like it was my reflection's life had been swapped with his. At first, I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was some kind of trick with the mirrors, some optical illusion I wasn't understanding. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became. When he shifted in his chair, my reflection shifted exactly the same way. When he raised a hand to gesture at something, my reflection raised a hand in the same motion, while my real hand sat still on the table. I even tried waving, thinking if I could force it to move, I could break whatever was happening. But my hand stayed on the table, and the reflection just followed him. My heart started racing. I looked around the cafe to see if anyone else noticed. People were sipping drinks, reading, staring at laptops, completely oblivious. Even the barista behind the counter didn't seem aware of anything strange. It made it worse. If anyone had seen it, maybe I could have asked them what they thought. But no one did. It was just me and this reflection that clearly wasn't following me. I tried testing it further. I picked up a spoon, hoping the reflection would copy my movement instead of his, and it didn't. It stayed still until he picked up his cup, and then mine followed along. I realized then that it wasn't just mimicking him. It was me, trapped in my own body, forced to watch myself imitate his actions without my consent. Every tilt of his head, every small twitch, every subtle glance made my body in the mirror move the same way. I wanted to leave. I tried standing up, thinking maybe if I moved across the room, the effect would stop. I pushed my chair back, and for a moment it felt like freedom. But my reflection stayed glued to the table, arms moving like his, torso twisting the way his did. I realized that moving my body in the real world didn't change the reflection at all. I was trapped in the cafe with this version of me that was no longer mine, and I couldn't interact with it, couldn't control it. I kept trying small things, subtle movements to see if I could break the pattern. I tapped my fingers, moved a foot, twitched an eyebrow. Nothing worked. The reflection ignored all of it, perfectly synchronized with him. Even when I tried to sit completely still, it felt like my body was being manipulated by some invisible thread attached to his movements. My stomach twisted, my pulse spiked. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt distant, like it was coming from the reflection and not from me. At some point, I noticed the other mirrors in the cafe. Each one reflected me, all of them mimicking his actions. It wasn't just the mirror across the table. The walls, the little mirror behind the counter, even the tiny reflective surfaces on the light fixtures, they all mirrored him through me. I felt trapped in a hall of reflections, every version of myself dancing to his movements while I couldn't move at all. I don't know how long I sat there frozen, watching myself imitate him. Time stopped making sense. Minutes could have passed, hours maybe. I felt my body starting to ache from holding tension in every muscle, trying to reclaim some control, but nothing worked. I thought about running, thought about smashing a mirror, but part of me feared what would happen if I did. Part of me feared that breaking a mirror might break me too. He got up at some point to grab more coffee. I followed him with my eyes, and my reflection followed him too. Even when he leaned over the counter to talk to the barista, my mirrored self leaned exactly the same way, torso bending, arms moving, tilting the head. I realized I couldn't separate my perception from the reflection. I couldn't escape it by looking away or turning my head. Wherever he went, my reflection went too. I started noticing small differences. The reflection wasn't perfect. It sometimes blinked too slowly, sometimes twitched slightly out of sync with the real him. But those moments were fleeting. Every tiny imperfection disappeared in a second, and then the reflection was perfectly sensed again. It was like a breathing thing, alive, learning my limits, testing me. I tried focusing on something else, thinking if I occupied my mind enough, maybe I could regain control. I counted the tiles on the floor, focused on the smell of the coffee, tried to remember my favorite song. Nothing worked. My reflection kept moving with him, a puppet version of me that was tethered to him, while I was trapped in my own body watching. Eventually, we left the cafe. I thought maybe stepping outside would break it. I thought maybe mirrors were just a confined space trick. But the outside had its own reflective surfaces, the windows of the cars, the glass doors of shops, puddles reflecting streetlights. Every reflective surface showed me doing exactly what he did. Even when there were no mirrors, my mind filled in the reflection, and I could feel my body mimicking him without trying. Walking down the street, I felt like I was both moving and frozen at the same time. People passed by, unaware, and I wondered if they could sense it too. I looked at my own shadow on the pavement. It didn't follow me. It followed him. Every step, every motion, every subtle gesture I made was his in shadow form too. I realized I wasn't just trapped in the mirror. I was trapped in his control, tethered to him in a way I couldn't break. By the time the date ended, I had no idea who I was anymore. I tried opening the car door to leave, but even my reflection in the window was moving like him, pretending to open it while my body struggled with every movement. I realized I couldn't act without him, couldn't move without his influence. The night ended, and I didn't get home on my own terms. I just followed, step by step, mirror by mirror, shadow by shadow, until he decided to stop. I don't know how long it took to get back to my apartment, but I swear every mirror along the way showed me doing what he was doing. Even when I finally shut the door behind me, I caught myself in the reflection of the hallway mirror, and it was still moving like him, not me. I couldn't even be alone in my own reflection. I realized I might never see myself the way I really was again. I met him at this little wine bar tucked between two shuttered storefronts on a side street I'd walked past a million times without noticing. He had that weird confidence that makes you think you should be nervous, but I wasn't, or at least I didn't think I was at first. The bar was dim, warm, the kind of place where the air smells faintly of oak barrels and old grapes, and the kind of place where you feel like the world outside just stops existing. We sat at a small table by a window that looked out onto the street. Outside, the city was alive but distant, like a movie playing behind glass. I remember him ordering for both of us without asking, and I thought it was a little strange, but I went with it. The wine arrived, rich and red, and the first few minutes passed in casual conversation. He had a quiet intensity, leaning in slightly, watching me in a way that made me feel noticed, seen, but in a way that also made me uneasy in the pit of my stomach. The evening was slow. We moved from wine to dessert, talking about music, books, mundane things, and yet there was this undercurrent I couldn't place. The bar started emptying. The bartender wiped down the counters, the lights dimmed further, and the streets outside darkened. At some point, he leaned back and smiled that weird smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I felt it more than I saw it, like a weight pressing on my chest, something that whispered I was part of something bigger than the night itself, but I couldn't figure out what. We left the bar together. He didn't offer to call a cab or check the bus schedule. He just gestured for me to follow him down a street I didn't recognize. Streetlights flickered above us, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. I didn't want to seem rude, so I kept walking, but I started noticing things. The shadows seemed sharper, the street quieter than it should have been. No cars passed. No one walked by. The buildings were tall and closed, their windows reflecting only the two of us. And then I saw her. Across the street, standing just outside a doorway, bathed in yellow light, was someone who looked exactly like me. Same hair, same shape, same coat. The longer I stared, the more impossible it felt. I blinked, thinking maybe the darkness was playing tricks on me, but when I looked again, she hadn't moved. Her eyes were on me, locked, unblinking. My stomach dropped. I wanted to turn and run, but he didn't hurry me, didn't acknowledge her at all. He just kept walking, like she wasn't there. Every instinct screamed at me that this wasn't normal, that something was deeply wrong. I tried to pull my phone out, thought about taking a picture. My hands felt heavy, slow. Even the streetlight seemed to dim whenever I glanced at her. We stopped at the corner. I wanted to ask him who she was, why she looked like me, why this was happening, but I couldn't. My voice had shrunk inside me, lost somewhere between fear and disbelief. He smiled again, that same strange smile, and then said the words that made my blood run cold. He thanked me for choosing to replace her. I froze. I didn't know what he meant. I wanted to argue, to deny it, to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. My double across the street didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. She was trembling slightly, small movements that made it clear she wanted to run, but couldn't. My chest tightened. It was like looking into a mirror of what I could have been, trapped and paralyzed, while this man stood smiling at me, thanking me for stepping into some role I didn't understand. The street felt narrower suddenly, the walls of the buildings pressing closer, like the city itself was folding around me. He reached out, touching my arm gently, but it was enough to make me flinch, enough to make me feel rooted to the spot. I could see the shape of his hand reflected in the window behind him, but not mine. My double remained silent, watching, shaking slightly now, her coat catching the light in a way that made her look unreal, like a mannequin posed to scare me. I tried moving my eyes away, tried to look anywhere else, but I kept catching her in reflections of the shop windows and puddles on the street. Each reflection showed her exactly as she was, trembling, waiting, and me, frozen, listening to his words. Thanking me. Choosing to replace her. Choosing. He started walking again, slow and deliberate. I followed, unable to stop myself. Every step I took felt like I was sinking further into something I didn't understand. The streets twisted. Familiar streets I thought I knew were suddenly wrong. Corners bending the wrong way. Shadows stretching unnaturally long. I realized the city wasn't just dark. It was orchestrated, shaped around this moment, around me, around her. We reached a small courtyard tucked behind a row of old brick buildings. He stopped again. My double was still there, watching from the street, silent, trembling, waiting. And that was when I felt it fully, the weight of choice, the impossibility of escape. I hadn't chosen anything, not consciously, but the moment enforced itself onto me. And now he was thanking me, like this had always been inevitable, like my life had already been written, and this was my part. I wanted to protest, scream, run, anything. But my voice stayed locked in my throat. My legs felt like stone, my hands useless. I could only watch him smile, a smile that somehow contained satisfaction and patience, like he'd been waiting for this night for years. The wind whispered around the courtyard, carrying the faint smell of old brick and wet leaves, but it couldn't wash away the sense that something permanent had just happened, something irreversible. I glanced back once more, just for a heartbeat, and my double was still there, watching, trembling, waiting. The street behind her seemed empty now, swallowed by shadows, as if the city had reclaimed it. And then I turned back to him. He didn't say anything else, just watched me with that same expression, the one that told me he knew exactly what he'd done and exactly what he had me do. We walked in silence after that. The air between us thick, electric, heavy with unspoken things. Every time I dared to glance back, she remained there, always there, a frozen echo of myself that I could neither reach nor free. The night stretched endlessly, buildings and streetlights repeating in patterns that seemed designed to trap me, to keep me walking, moving until whatever it was he had orchestrated could fully settle. By the time he finally stopped at the edge of a park near my apartment, the first hints of dawn were breaking. He turned to me, gave that same calm, assured smile, and simply let me go. I wanted to step forward, to push him, to ask him questions, but something inside me had already learned. Whatever choice I thought I had made, whatever replacement he had spoken of, it wasn't something I could undo. And across the street in the early light, I saw her one last time, watching, waiting, trembling. I got home without speaking, without moving faster than the slow, careful shuffle. The door closed behind me, and I thought I was safe. But I kept thinking about her, about the way she mirrored me perfectly, about the words he said. I kept thinking about how this city, his streets, the night itself had been shaped around this replacement. This exchange I didn't agree to, didn't understand, but had somehow already happened. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. I don't know if she's still out there, if he's still orchestrating, if I'm now a permanent part of whatever he does next. All I know is that when I step outside, when I see someone across the street, I check twice because it might be her. and I feel the same unshakable fear that someone somewhere might be watching me, thanking me for choosing something I never wanted to choose.